Start in the back. Oh, sorry. I'm looking for the person who's just put a mouthful of food in, and good job. That's a way to start off. Okay.
So my name is Misha, and I'm a master's student, and I'm going to start my PhD, and it's going to be about geophysics.
Perfect.
My name is Shiva. I'm a master's student in geophysics at the University of
I'm Jeremy Tillman.
Hello, my name is Edwin. I'm a geologist here in Ontario, and I'm just taking the course.
My name is Carlos Fuentes. I'm a geophysicist. I just need to do the first meeting.
Jamie Crystal. I'm studying at UBC. Principal geophysicist at Anglo American.
Captain Devlin. I'm a Sudbury-based geophysicist. Mika Wolframson. I work at Julie as a development engineer. I work on the equipment side. I work on the equipment side.
I'm Rob. I'm a third-year geology.
Malcolm. I'm a master's student at Queen's.
I'm Cal Walter. I'm a PhD student at Queen's, and I'm doing magnetics.
Roman was electrical additive geophysics. I'm more in the applied marketing of the EM systems.
Mark Goldie, I'm a geophysicist with Iron Gold. I enjoyed your last world tour. That's why I'm here.
And Jennifer Ju worked for the VS Canada, same reason. But at the very beginning, I thought maybe when I get in, they're all full of young people. But now I see Rob Bird as love. I appreciate you, Rob. Such a distinguished man.
I'm Stefan Sander. I'm the Center of Geophysics, and we're doing increasing amounts of EM, so I'm interested in it.
And
I'm Jose Arce from Arce Geophysicals in Peru, and we are starting to do endominium.
I'm Kaman Pereira, working with contact geoscience. I'm mainly working on MTA.
I'm Owori. I'm a geophysicist. Previously worked in South Africa, doing lots of land and gravity. Currently working for Anglo in Vancouver, and doing more and more EM, so I'm trying to get exposure.
I'm Martin Bates from Standard Geophysics, and Stefan said we're doing more EM these days, and I'm trying to get to understand what we're doing.
I'm Nihal, working as a geophysicist in Tech Turkey office. We are interested with thermal and photovoltaic oil systems. Just I have old school kind of information for you, so it's a good learning time for me.
My name is Eduardo. I work with exploration geophysics more than 20 years. I've been playing around with EM for a long time.
Hi, I'm Jerry Stanley. I work at the Geological Survey in Ireland, and I'm a geologist, but I can spell EM.
That may be better than some of us.
I'm Carlos Montano. I'm a geophysics student at the University of Chicago.
I'm Tim Archer. I'm an independent consultant working with Alan Reid in the UK. We offer gravity, magnetics, and EM, so hopefully I'll know some of what I was talking about today. But here to fill in some gaps. Thanks.
I'm Jenna McKenzie. I'm a consultant with RM Geoscience, and I'm interested in EM and observation and exploration.
Harrison McGill, currently with the project. Previously spent 15 years in the airborne side, working largely with EM systems, but we're just doing a review and see what's new.
Marco, working for the Geological Survey of Brazil. We started to work with EM kind of a few years ago. I'm working with this data. It's always good to be exposed to EM learning.
Back.
Grant Harrison, Marine Resources Canada, geophysicist, working around the
You're Henry Chef, you've got funds, managing different geophysical programs and application for different countries.
Chris Jennings, I'm a PhD student at the Town Hospital Mines in the UK. In the best way to describe my PhD is not the other which is advanced painting on
Mark Yankee, ex-GeoSci.xyz. Josh Limmer with Activity Geophysics, just looking to see if there's anything maybe to take away from the side today.
Vicky Sheher, I'm a research scientist at the Geological Survey of Canada, and I'm hoping to learn more about the end.
David Fox, General Manager of Geophysics. I guess there's lots of new stuff.
Just go directly to the Phoenix group.
Our time is also inside the church a lot of stuff. So I'm really interested in more about static shift production, using creating flow source.
Matthew Vedderberg from Potash Corp in Saskatoon. I'm just here to get a refresher on the
Tom Blow, I'm a master's student at the University of Saskatchewan. My master's is on using EM for potash.
Gordon Nabik, contextual science, working a lot on TCIP and energy for a long time now, and getting fresh on EM and some other things. I'm Dimitri Stephen, working for contextual science, and some
Larry Gucci, Dennis Marks, I'm older than Rob. And there are other things. I've been interviewing Indiana for the last 4 years and still learning.
Now, I did one with geoscience. I have a PhD in geophysics, working in version on a daily basis.
Do I have to introduce myself? Contact GeoSci.xyz, here to prove that you can't teach them all about it.
Oh, and David wants to be introduced. That was really cool. I have some more things I wanted to say about these. I'm going to move on. Okay. Oh, this is great. Okay, so there, you can tell, there are a wide variety of backgrounds, a wide variety of aspirations. This could be a challenge for me, but we're going to try to, I hope by the end of the day, everybody's going to go home and say, yeah, I learned something, I got some new insight, and I am really glad I came. So that's my goal. The other thing, I have one more question. How many people, like this is all part of Exploration 17. There was workshops before, workshop yesterday. How many people have been here for 5 or more days? You guys are crazy. It's been a life. I mean, like we love geophysics. It's great. It's great. Yeah, 6 days is a little over. Okay. So now, actually, that gives me some hope because now I know you're crazy. So. Yeah. Is that, oh, that's the, we've had challenges with microphones. I walk around a lot, so I can't use a fixed one. I alluded to before, we're going to talk a lot today. We are going to talk about it. So, yeah, I looked down my cups a lot. Okay, so this is the DISC 2017. Each year, the Society for Exploration for Geophysics nominates somebody to go out and get a topic that they think might be interesting. Almost invariably, it's oil and gas, but this year they've opted for electromagnetics. So this is what we are, electromagnetics, fundamentals, and applications. Before we start, the success of anything depends a huge amount on the local organization. So there's Kegs here, who's been really responsible, thanks Jenna and everybody else, and Chris Nim, who really put things together. So I I thank everybody here, Exploration 17, and also our own group here, the Geophysical Immersion. You told me a little bit about you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I was inspired to do inversion because I did a PhD at Scripps Institution of Oceanography a long time ago. Even Rob might have been. I don't know, but it was still a long time ago. And I had Bob Parker, who maybe you know, Freeman Gilbert, George Backus. These were the people who really pioneered the whole aspect of geophysical inverse theory. They were the people who really put it on the right format. I want to give you a bit of history, and just to put things in perspective. In 1975, we were able to solve maybe like a 1D DC resistivity and MT problem, maybe 50 variables. Later on, about 1985, we could do 2D DC IP, 1,000 variables. 95, now we can do the 3D problem. Mag, gravity, DC, and IP. By the time we get to 2005, we can solve the 3D frequency and time domain EM problem with a few sources. And then two things happened that were absolutely pivotal. One is direct solvers, which allowed us to take the big matrix, Maxwell matrix system, and factor it. And the second was that we had multiprocessors. And those two things together really created a revolution, and that meant that by 2015, we could solve the 3D frequency and time domain EM problem with a lot of sources. The result of that is that today, and you saw it today or this last week at the convention, we've got the computational power and the advances in inversion theory. I think we can basically solve virtually any electromagnetic problem that's around. So that's where we are kind of on the inversion side. If we look at what is happening on the instrumentation and data side, you'll see for people who are here, I mean, you just had 4 or 5 days of people talking about, you know, new equipment and just impressive quantities and quality of data. So that is a really important thing. So we now have large amounts of data that are really of high quality that could be applied in all kinds of problems. The other thing that we now have that we didn't have 10 years ago are web and open source resources. This has actually been huge. So we now have new resources that we can collaborate with, we can share, we can test changes, we can interact, and we've got open source software. Here's what I'll talk a little bit about today. SimPeg, all of the examples that you're going to see, well, most of them have been developed through an open source software, SimPeg, which has been developed by the groups at UBC and elsewhere, and that's allowed people to communicate and to compute things. The other thing, and I notice this especially now as we're traveling around the world, just all of the applications that exist. I mean, if you look at problems that are faced within society, okay, so maybe there's mineral exploration, so this is what everybody here is mostly involved with. But there's contaminants, there's a whole bunch of issues with respect to water, geothermal energy, unexploded ordnances, hydrocarbons, slope stability, geotechnical, and especially as you go around the world, you see that different countries have different themes of these, but these things all exist. So we got the basic ingredients, right? We got application problems, you need to have problems. Got high quality data. We have the ability to invert any of those data sets, and we got the web tools to communicate. So it seems like, okay, this is a no-brainer. Why isn't everybody doing EM? So what are the roadblocks? And maybe think for yourself for a second, like, okay, you know, what is it the thing for me that kind of prevents me from either thinking about EM or doing something about EM? or what? Everybody would probably have their own personal opinion on that. But here they are, at least here's some of them. You know, in general, geoscientists don't even realize the role that that EM can play in solving their problem. And they don't understand the technique. The terminology is really confusing, right? I mean, you know, these guys are going around, they're talking about real parts of the data, the imaginary parts of the data, they have no idea, right? And it's just complicated and it's unintuitive. Seismic is really, it's a no-brainer, right? I'm going to put a pulse down, you know, hit some impedance contrast, reflects back up. I mean, I got that. EM, you know, you get data and you're like, what's that, right? So that's a problem. An important aspect is also, what's the connection between the physical property that I'm interested in and my problem? Because that's the only way we can communicate. You have to, if you have a problem, you have to kind of transform it into, you know, physical property and get some connection to that. So even if you actually did get to this point and you said, okay, I'm going to use EM. Well, now you're at the problem that a lot of people at this conference are talking about. Okay, which survey should I use? Now, should I use a DC survey? Frequency domain? Time domain? Where's my survey? Is it on the ground? Should I put it up in the air, downhole? And what do I expect for resolution? So those are all problems. And then maybe the other thing, and this is what a lot of people would appeal to most, is like, oh my God, can I find a problem that's similar to mine that EM has been used for successful? So those are the problems, and they're serious problems. So the goal for me today, the goal of this, is actually to basically do the following. I just want to get rid of that stuff. And I hope by the end of the day, that you'll have much more of a sense about all of these things which used to kind of be a roadblock and feel like, okay, that's not such an issue. So we have what I believe to be a perfect storm. We got problems, we got high quality data, we can invert the data, web tools to communicate. So here's the disk. So that's the purpose of this. We're just going to try to take advantage of this, all the stuff that's out here, and really put it together. That's a good idea. What's the missing ingredient? Anybody? Us, exactly. The missing ingredient are all these really bright, brilliant people. I got two of them sitting right here. So there's Lindsay and Saudi, my co-presenters, and a whole host of other people. You need to have that core group. And they have to be young, Rob. They can't be like you and me, right? It's just like, I'm sorry. You're maybe the most pristine guy here, but yeah. I could go for Lindsay. So here's our goal for this. Okay, by the end of the day, honestly, I want to inspire you to, just by seeing a variety of potential applications, and we're going to illustrate their effectiveness through a whole bunch of case histories. We're going to build a foundation for you. We're going to look at the basic principles of EM. We're going to explore them through some visualizations and apps. And I'm going to introduce you to an open source resource that we've been developing for the last couple of years. The other thing we're going to do is try to set realistic expectations for what you can get out of electromagnetics. And maybe one of the biggest things that I think, if we can make some road to achieve today, we'll have done something that's really important. And that is, our goal with DISC is to try to promote a community of EM people that can talk to each other, that can converse, that can share, and use open source software, capture case histories worldwide, get people talking, get people sharing, and working together to solve problems. Talk a bit about the resources. How many people have seen this book? Oh, good job. That's like two-thirds of people have seen this book, okay? There's a chapter in this book by Ward and Holman, which is incredibly useful. Every student that I've ever had come through UBC has gone through that chapter of the book, and it's Maxwell's equations, and it takes you through all kinds of things. It does not, however, give you perhaps as much insight as it could. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to basically take this book and make it live. And so we have here on our EM GeoSci, there is a page that's got some background on Maxwell's equations, and it's got case histories, and case histories are going to play a really important part. And it's also a door to interactive application modules that you can ask questions about. The case histories that I'm going to present today, the case histories that we do, follow a very specific framework. And probably every person out here would, if you had to parse a case history into a number of steps, this is what you choose. So this is, I think, should be kind of intuitive, at least feeling very comfortable. The first is the setup. What's my problem? And you have to articulate, what exactly is it that I really want to solve? What's my physical properties that are associated with that? Which survey do I choose? What's my data? What processing do I use? What's my interpretation? And then what's my synthesis? How have I impacted upon that problem? This is the way I think that most people would think. But you would be surprised that if you take something and you parse it down into those 7 steps, how easy it is to then communicate with people, even people who don't know anything about what you're doing. You present this to them, and you're kind of at step 4. They know, like, okay, I got it. I know exactly where you are. So we're going to do a lot of that. And there's a lot of case histories on here. We can also edit this stuff. So we're going to ask, well, we've been asking people to contribute, and a lot of people have, and things can get edited live on the web. Why apps? So these are application modules that allow you to ask questions. Here's Ward and Holman back here. These are Maxwell's equations. Here's one, here's another one. And sure, there's a lot of stuff that's in that. You can do all kinds of stuff, right? But you just don't glean a lot of information from that. However, if you can take that and put it into some kind of an application module where now you can, so this is for a grounded dipole, and you can have different parameters, and you have some slider bars, and you can ask yourself some questions about, well, what would happen if I changed the frequency, or if I did this or did that? And you can help answer that with this app, and then you learn and get some insight. So how are we going to achieve our goals? Well, first of all, we're going to connect to relevant applications, select a survey. We're going to use the apps that explore and ask questions, and then show success in the case history. So that's kind of how we're going to proceed. The agenda for today is pretty ambitious. Kicking off. So what I wanted to do is take on the challenge of, can we take electromagnetics right from square one to square n, so that in one day somebody can sit down and say, I've seen all the aspects of electromagnetics and I got it. And I understand if I've got a particular problem, kind of where I fit in and what I want to do with it, what I want to get out. So we're going to start at the very beginning, DC resistivity. Everybody knows about DC resistivity, and partway through here you're going to say, well, why am I doing this? Why is he telling me what a pseudo section is, for God's sake? Everybody knows that. Okay, but we're going to start at the beginning, because the DC resistivity problem is the mother of all problems, and in that problem we set up the whole concept of electric charges that are built up in the Earth, And those electric charges are going to be with us through the rest of this. Then we're going to look at the EM fundamentals, just the very, very basic. And then inductive sources. The interesting thing here is that when you look at Ward and Holman, you see, okay, we're going to start with Maxwell's equations. What are the first thing we're going to do? We're going to convert them to the frequency domain. Good. Because frequency domain is easy to solve, right? And you solve stuff in the frequency domain, you do this, you do that, you do that. And then the next section is the time domain. So it's, and when I first did it, it's like, just like, okay, wow, these are really different things, right? But they're not different. Physics is the same, and we are going to just flip back and forth all day today between frequency, time, frequency, time, frequency, time. And it turns out that the intuition that you get in the time domain is the intuition that's intuitive to you. It is something that you understand, whereas you try to build up intuition in the frequency domain, it's much more challenging. Then we're going to go to grounded sources, natural sources. So here's where your MT is. Here's where all your, is there anybody here who's interested in hydrocarbons particularly? We asked, this was actually a big effort to come here because we were just in Europe, okay? So Europe, they're not interested in hydrocarbons. They're not interested in minerals. They're interested in geothermal energy. They're interested in waste dumps. They're interested in landslides. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on, right? Previously, we were in places like, okay, we're just hydrocarbon, right? Okay, so now we got everything hydrocarbon. Here we come. We have to get rid of, most everything, and we're got case histories for minerals, but that's kind of where we are. So natural sources, that's the MT and ZGEM. GPR, we may not get too much in there. I'll show you one example. Induced polarization is big, and there's a few things out here that I'm going to augment with respect to IP, and that is the decoupling problem, and also some, what I think is the first work that has been done on 3D inversion of airborne IP data. It's for a chemical IP policy. So I think all of that kind of fits in. It's a big agenda. We've got a variety of backgrounds. I'm hoping that everybody will come away with something. And there's a few people in here that are really pretty expert. So it's always a little intimidating, right? You're somebody who knows everything about electromagnetics, and you're sitting up here trying to talk to them about electromagnetics. But for even these people who really know a lot, I got to tell you. So every Saturday morning, I go out for coffee with my wife, and we meet some friends. We go to the same coffee shop. We tell the same jokes. And we've been with the same people every Saturday morning for 23 years. It's a long time, and you tell you. So if you guys know any new jokes, that was the main reason for telling you that. But anyway, at the bottom line here is that they always have a little board that's put on that has a saying on it. So here's your quote of the day. And this one I really like. It's by George Lessing. And it's the following. That is what learning is. You suddenly understand something that you've understood all your life, but in a different way. That's enriching. That's really enriching. And I think for all of us who've experienced that, like, okay, you kind of go through and you understand something, and then somebody just gives a little bit of a different tweak on it, and suddenly like, oh, that's cool, right? And so maybe for all those experts out there, maybe that's it. The DISC is ordinarily a 2-day event. Just because of what we're going on here, the DISC is only a 1-day event. So that means that I have to get all the material in here, which is why, it's a lot of talking. But ordinarily we have a DISC lab. I'm going to tell you about this just for a second anyway. So the way in which we do it almost everywhere is we have one day where we're kind of coursey, and then the next day, maybe there's a bit of material that we haven't covered the first day, so we do that. And then what we do is we interact them, we ask the people who attended, for those who want to kind of give a lightning talk on what they have, what they're interested in, what their problem is. And we capture that, we put it on YouTube, and you know, if they have slides, we've got all that. So what it means is, as we've gone around the world, we have at each location captured the problems that people are interested in. And so they're up on our website, you can view them through our blog. And it's really interesting because you go to one part of the country and they have some problems, someplace else, they're different. And it's a way of sharing. Again, it's a way of opening up this kind of communication, which is what we're trying to do. So by the time we do 30 locations, we get 5 or 10 each. It's quite a bit of stuff, and, you know, stuff to share, stuff to understand, and work together. Connecting, contributing. We've got our open source GeoSci. There's something called Slack. Has anybody used Slack? It's a couple people. It's a great way to communicate. You can just quickly send an idea, ask a question, upload a picture, and in some places we've actually used this. In fact, you could join a Slack channel, and while I'm talking, you know, if I say something that, you know, is crazy or you don't understand or something, you can always put something on Slack, and I don't see it, but Lindsay will see it, and she'll answer your question, and she says, yeah, you're right, the guy up there doesn't know anything. It's okay, whatever. Anyway, so then you can contribute to our website, GeoSci for case histories. So Quantec has just done, we have a case history today, Santa Cecilia, which has been showcased a couple of times during the talk with that case history song, and Quantec, and then contributing software. Good, so that's kind of what I want to do. So now what I want to do is look at just some problems that kind of motivate things and get down to a little bit of basics. I just selected 3 random problems. One's mineral exploration, unexploded ordnance, and water. And the reason I did this is because they bring in 3 physical properties which are important for electromagnetics. And we're going to use the term electrical resistivity. That is the physical property that tells you how easy it is to pass a current through a rock. And resistivities are in ohm meters, and they vary by many orders of magnitude, 8, 10, 12. So you got massive sulfides on one side, and which have very low resistivity, and you've got igneous and metamorphic rocks, which have very high resistivity. A lot of the rocks that we deal with are kind of in between. Freshwater's here, saltwater's here. The inverse of resistivity is conductivity. And that scale is down here. So anything that has a high resistivity has a low conductivity, and vice versa. As geophysicists, we tend to use them interchangeably, sometimes even in the same sentence, but you just kind of get used to that. But you do need to know what's resistive and what's conductive, and you also have to remember the color scales, because some people change color scales, right? And yeah, that can kind of torque you up. So that's the first physical property. The second one is electrical permittivity, and usually we take a ratio, so it's really called the relative permittivity or the dielectric constant. And it varies with materials. Air is 1, and fresh water is 80, and most other things kind of fall partway in between. This particular physical property is going to be important, especially at very high frequencies in GPR. Then we have magnetic susceptibility, the ease with which a rock can acquire magnetization. Again, that varies by orders of magnitude. Magnetite has very high magnetic susceptibility, and you get other rocks in here that are very low. It doesn't matter which of those physical properties you're trying to investigate, we have to do the following. We have source, and input energy. The propagation of that energy through the substratum depends upon Maxwell's equations, and the responses that you measure depend upon the distribution of those three physical properties. Maxwell's equations are here. This is a non-mathematical course, but you're going to see this equation a number of times and gain some insight into what each of those equations is doing. The first was Faraday's law, which basically says I've got a time-varying magnetic field, I get an electric field. So here's the source, here's the result. Next was Ampere's law, says if I have a current, I get a magnetic field. And then we got constitutive relationships. These things provide the tie between a field, E, and a flux. So all of these are constitutive relationships. They are additional material or additional information that has been generated in a lab. We can write the equations in two forms. We can write them directly in the time domain, or we can take Fourier transform and write them in the frequency domain. We'll be fairly constant throughout the course that capital values are really referring to things that are going on in the frequency domain and the small letters in the time domain. So let's look at an electromagnetic survey. Let's first of all think about the sources. Okay? So what can we have for sources? Well, we can have what's called an inductive source. So here's just a loop of wire carrying current. There's no physical contact. Or we could have a grounded source. We're going to put a current in those sources. And they could be a harmonic current like this. So that's where the F comes in, sort of a frequency. It's a harmonic. Or it could be some kind of a transient. So it's got some time on, time off. And it could be quite variable. So we can have different waveforms. And then we can also have different locations of the source. It could be in the air. It could be on the ground. It could be in the ground. So already you see, like, okay, just from the point of view of sources, yeah, we got some choices. What about data? Well, now we've got receivers. We could measure an electric field just simply by putting some probes in, measuring voltage. We could measure a magnetic field, and we can measure these in three components. So which field do you want? Do you want an E? Do you want a B? T? Which frequencies? Low frequency, high? Time? Which time? Measure different time. And then also locations. Do you want measured data in the air, on the ground, inside? So you start to see how, how things could get actually pretty complicated because there's lots of combinations that you could use. We're going to concentrate today on electrical conductivity. And even in those three problems that we just talked about, electrical conductivity is kind of a uniform theme. So basically, we're going to think about sources, inputting energy, finding out something about conductivity. So with that, I'm now going to go to DC resistivity. And of course, you're very welcome to ask questions at any time. This is supposed to be kind of low key. Okay, so let us start at the beginning. This is something that everybody, I think almost, has seen. And instead, sometimes you're going to wonder, wait a minute, this is not going fast enough. But trust me, it'll be okay. Here's DC resistivity. We've got a source. We're going to look at resistivity, and that's the guy that we want to get. Why do we want to do this? Well, a whole bunch of reasons. We've got minerals, could be in-mine problems, gas, water, geotechnical issues. DC resistivity is just used in a whole host of places. We had seen this before. It was the electrical conductivity table that we had. The thing that is important is that resistivity varies by many orders of magnitude, and it's actually a pretty complicated physical property to get a handle on. It varies by for a whole bunch of different reasons. First of all, changes with respect to rock type, and then also, porosity is a big deal. There's connectivity of all of the pores and the nature of the fluid. So a lot of the electrical conduction is actually done by the fluids. It depends on how that's all connected. And then there's the matrix of the solid and what minerals in there. So it is actually understanding how you get a particular value of electrical resistivity or conductivity is actually really complicated. But the bottom line is changes and things are very important with respect to scales. I'm going to outline the DC resistivity experiment, and then we're going to go through the sensitivity survey design and an example. So here's the basic experiment. This cartoon was taken from the Allura deposit. How many people know the Allura deposit? So you can tell it, Bob, it's been around a long time. Okay. So there's an overburden, there's mineralization, there's a resistive cap for gossip, and then there's the background. So this guy's resistive, so conductive overburden, and you want to try to find it. Okay, so we're going to set up a DC experiment. So we take a generator, attach it to 2 probes, and then the current is going to flow from the positive probe to the negative. And as you might think, the current kind of avoids really resistive regions and kind of gets channeled through conductors. That is associated with the buildup of charges on the outside of this body, wherever the conductivity changes. And those charges, by Coulomb's law, give rise to an electric potential that you can measure at the surface. So that's basically it. Put current in the ground. As that current goes through media of different conductivities, we're going to get charges, and then that's going to give us an electric potential. So how do we obtain the resistivity? Well, let's go back to Maxwell's equations. Here with Maxwell's equations in the flow, but in a steady state, now we're talking about just driving current on, there's no time variation. So that means the curl of V is actually 0, so we can represent that as gradient of potential. And the other Maxwell's equation gives us this. We've got Ohm's law, we put it together. We get this equation here, which is, sometimes it's called the mother of all equations. And this is an equation that you see everywhere. Just doesn't matter where you look. You'll see div, sigma, grad, phi is equal to something. And for our case here, for a homogeneous Earth, if we put a current into the ground, we can actually calculate an analytic expression that the voltage has this relationship here. Here's the resistivity, here's the current, and that's R. That's the distance that you are from the current. So let's just take a look at that. Here's a picture of the currents, and you're going to see a lot of pictures of currents. This is where you understand what's going on in electromagnetics. You have to look at the currents, you have to look at the charges. So we're putting a current into the ground, and then how would you expect the current to go up? Well, there's no preferential direction, so it's just going to flow up like that. And that means that the potential is going to look like this. So you notice it actually becomes infinite right at that source of the current. And here's an expression for the electric potential. Now the amazing thing about this, if you kind of think about it, is that I could take this expression here and just rearrange it, just like this. So instead of looking at this, I could rearrange it like this. And then I could go someplace out here, any place, and just measure the potential. So I got a number, 6.9. Okay? I take that number, I put it in here, so I know what the distance is, and I get a resistivity rho. It's actually 500 ohm meters, which is equal to the resistivity here. So, I mean, honestly, if you think about it, that's kind of cool, right? So I plug a current in, and I just measure one number, and then I can get the resistivity of here. Well, you can't actually do something that's simple. If you're going to put current into the ground, then you need to have two electrodes. So we're going to hook things up for an A and a B. And in our case, the A electrode is always going to be the positive, and the B is always the negative current. So now I put a positive current in here, negative current in here, and now you can see how the currents are going to flow, right? It's kind of what you'd imagine. They're going to flow through here. So instead of radiating out, they kind of go like this. The electric potential looks like this. And I could compute what that potential difference is by just, let's suppose I try to measure it with a voltage probe, measure the difference between these two. And here M is always going to be the positive and M is the negative. So we're going to establish that right at the beginning. And then the potential difference that I measured is just given by this formula here, which basically is linear superposition of everything that we had before. And then I could lump all this stuff into kind of a geometric factor, and then I get this expression here. So now if I come along, and I can do the same thing. I can take any 2 points. I can take these two, dot, dot. I can take one over here, one over here, one over here, it doesn't matter. Any 2 points. Plug them in, and I get my true resistivity. Okay, so that's the basic kind of fundamental principles. And now the question is, okay, so suppose I change the earth a little bit, and now I put a little bit of a conducting layer. So this was 500 ohm meters. What do you think is going to happen to the currents if I make this a lower resistivity? Okay, I'm sorry, you're doing this? Pardon me? Edward? What's going to happen to the currents if I make it a bit lower resistivity? How are they going to travel?
Homogeneous will be the same.
So I'm going to make, so what's going to happen to the currents? But yeah, so the currents will concentrate where? Yeah. So if there's a low resistivity, current's going to preferentially flow through here. So, so that's going to change that, the potential in here. Now if I take the same formula and I compute the resistivity, I get 226. So it's not 100, it's not 500, it's someplace that happens in between. And you can see that's kind of what you'd expect, because there's some currents flowing in here, some in here. So my apparent resistivity is in between. So we have an app. I'm not going to get a chance, and there's not going to be a chance because we're limited to 1 day to have you explore a lot. We'll give you a little bit of a feeling after, but we've got a whole bunch of apps, and here's one for kind of visualizing what we just saw here. So you could put in your background resistivities, change your layers, and just look to see what the potentials are, where the currents are, and what the apparent resistivity would be. So you could game them all through that. I'll talk just briefly again about science array, just to make sure everybody's on the same page here. So a lot of the arrays have a particular geometry to it. This is called a Wenner array. So we've got current electrodes on the outside, potentials on the inside, and all these spaces are say. And here's a Schlumberger, kind of a kissing cousin. Generally, you just have a small voltage or small distance in between. The data that we're going to measure are going to be, we're going to talk about a sounding. And we're going to have to measure something called apparent resistivity as a function of this kind of scale length. So in our first case, we're going to look at our same case up here, but with the A-B electrodes really close together. So if the A-B electrodes are really close together, then the current's kind of mostly concentrated right in here, and the potential difference that you measure at any place else, in the case here in the winter, actually comes up to be about 100.3. Right? So basically you're just seeing what's in here, and you can tell that's probably happening just because of the currents. And here's where you are here on that sounding curve. If I increase that A-B spacing up here, now you can start to see that we get more currents that are flowing down here. The apparent resistivity goes to 135. Increase up here, more currents in here, apparent resistivity is 235. Right, so as we continue to increase the length of the array, we see deeper. So that's an important aspect that's going to come through it. If you want to see deep, you somehow have to have long separations. Okay, so that's kind of our sounding array, and I think the important point here again is that if you want to see deep, you need to have big separation. This curve that we saw here, that's a data curve. So that is that's just a plot of the data. So this is apparent resistivity, and this is something of a scale length. So that's not geology, that's just a plot of data. What we really want to do is we want to invert those things. We want to get a plot of depth and resistivity. So our goal is to kind of take the data and work through the processing and inversion to get this. Okay, so I gotta tell you this, just kind of saying my whole life has probably been kind of devoted to this business here. However, today's lecture, we're not going to talk about this. It's just like, okay, let's assume we can do this. But I'm going to tell you basically how it's done, or how most people are doing it. And that is that when we have data, then we're just going to divide the Earth up into a whole bunch of cells. I think everybody knows it. You divide it up into a whole bunch of cells, and then you adjust the values of those cells until you fit the data, and you also fit whether a priori information you have about the Earth. Okay, so, and we can do that in 1D, we can do it in 2D, and we can do it in 3D. And as I said before, we can now solve most every problem that we need to. So we're going to assume that we just know how to do this, and go over that step, because we want to concentrate on what we can get out of electromagnetics, not concentrate on the details of this box in here. So let's go back and look at this business of, remember I talked about charges, and let's just look a little bit more at what's going to happen. So first of all, I've got a current that's coming in through like this, right? So it's steady state, that means nothing's changing. So that means that the current density on this side has to be the same as the current density in here. So it's going through. And that means that if J1 is the current density on this side, N just stands for the normal thing. That's got to be equal to J2. Okay? But Ohm's law says J is equal to sigma E, so that means we've got sigma 1 E1 is equal to sigma E2. But if sigma 1 on this side is different from sigma 2, that means that E1 has to be different from E2. So the electric fields must change. Okay, so wind your memories back to first year physics, okay, when you're talking about electrostatics. And the question is, well, how do you get an electric field to change abruptly at a boundary? Well, think about it, but the answer is also here. If I have a charge, so if I have a sheet of positive charges, then the electric field goes out this way and this way from the charge. So if I'm looking at the electric field across here, it's changing discontinuously. So the fact that I've got a steady state current density here means that there's a charge buildup, and those charge buildup, this is Coulomb's law, tells us what the electric field is, or I can measure the voltage difference. Therein lies the complete understanding of what's going on in the DC resistivity problem. We're going to be building up these charges. So let's just take a look at them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that homogeneous earth and we're going to put in a conducting cylinder. And so here's the positive, it comes down here, here's the negative. So there's the total currents. If I looked at what are called the secondary currents, so this is the difference between what the currents would be in the half space and what this is, I get currents that are looking like this. So they kind of look like a diode. And if I look at the charges, I can see, oh, there's a negative charge that's being built up on this side and a positive charge on this side. So these charges that are built up will give rise to a secondary potential that looks like this. And this is what we're going to measure at the surface of the Earth. We're going to try to measure this secondary potential, and that's telling us something about the existence of these charges, and well as the conductivity. Yeah?
So Doug, on that slide, you're using J for current, not E.
Correct. J is the current density.
Current density.
Yeah.
Okay.
So J is the current density, and that is related to E by sigma times E.
Yep.
But the point was here, we had a constant, we'd have a constant current that's going through here, right? It's a steady state, nothing is changing. So it's constant current. But sigma 1 is different from sigma 2, and the fact that the product of sigma times E is the same on both sides means something about change is the electric field, right? And so that's the charges. So what happens now? How does all that affect us? Let's suppose we have, it's kind of like a gradient array. We're just going to put a current here and a potential, or sorry, A electrode here, B electrode here. And we're going to measure the potentials as we go across. So now if we have our potential electrodes here, right? So they're going to be affected by these charges, right? And I'm going to get a reduced potential. And if I plug that into the formula, I get a current resistivity of 430 ohm meters. So that's cool. That's kind of what we want, right? We want to measure something at the surface here that gives rise to, indicates that there's a low resistivity. If I put it out over here, however, it's kind of interesting. I get an apparent resistivity that's 502. So remember what we had. So we've got this background is 500, and this guy was 1 ohm meter. And yet I'm actually getting out a number that's larger than anything, right? Which at some point you might not expect, but within the next hour you're going to understand that that's kind of intuitive. But we actually get a number that's larger than 500. So you can think about that. I'm not going to ask you to explain for us why you could get something that's larger than 500, but think about what your answer would be, and then we'll kind of come back to that. So we put all that together. We have currents out here. We just measure the potentials in here. We have, 500, something that's low, and then a little bit over here. So we tend to see this conductive plot. If we want to look at something like this with what we call a profiling mode. So in a sounding, well, I guess I didn't explain it exactly. I explained it, but I didn't really emphasize it. So the idea is in a sounding mode, we're going to fix our array, and then we're just going to progressively go outward, right? So it's just like I'm looking straight down here, yeah, right? Okay, so looking straight down here, and if I'm really small array length, then I'm only going to see you. I don't even see you. A little bit later, okay, I can see you. A little bit later, see all the way down back. So that's a sounding. I'm looking directly. On the other hand, if I'm looking for lateral variations, then I want to kind of do a profile. So now I might take my same array and I'd just be going along like this. Now, if my array is really tight together, I don't even see you, right? So the only thing that's here. But if it's farther apart, I move along. I could see you. You can see it all. So here's what happens. If I put the array close together, I move along, and I just get the background of the half space. I'm just seeing it, right? But if I make this farther apart, okay, and I move it along, and I actually get something that looks like this. So the apparent resistivity is now 350. So while it's sitting up over here, it's 350 ohms. So that's really well below 500, right? So it's a really nice curve. Notice how these flanks have got way bigger. They're way larger than 500. So apparent resistivities can kind of overshoot sometimes. So that's the profiling mode, and clearly what you'd want to do is to sometimes just expand, do a sounding, as well as do a profiling. So you want to combine those two things. So the methods of doing that are involve a lot of these different setups. Gradient array I just kind of talked about. Things that you'll hear a lot about are like pole, dipole, dipole, dipole. I mean, everything is always 4 electrodes. You can't get away with that. But if you take one electrode, for instance, this current electrode, and you just haul it, a couple of kilometers away, it's not really affecting anything. And so you tend to refer to that as a pole dipole. Or if you run both of them away, you could have a pole experiment. So you hear those words, and usually it just means that somebody's run an electrode a long way away. I have to plot data. How do we plot? Actually, is there anybody in this room that does not know what a pseudosection is? Okay, it's very quick. So we're going to, we need to somehow plot the data, so we're going to choose this sort of 45-degree rule. So we've got this dipole, we've got current here, potential here, plot midway in between. And then if we move these two farther apart, we plot down, move farther apart, plot down. And then for each point, we've got our apparent resistivity formula, so that just allows us to build up a map. And then yeah, so what's happening, what we're going to do in here is we're going to start off with the current here and then measure the potentials as this goes expand. That's going to give us this. Then we move over here, up, and here, up, and just gradually build that up. Okay, so there we go. So there's our apparent resistivity pseudosection It is a map of the data. It is not a map of geology. It's just data. And what we do see is that there's low resistivities, there's some reds, and there's some blues, but as I said, we do not want to make a geologic interpretation from that. And it's called a pseudo-section. So here's a block. So it's a more of a conductive block in a background half space. If I do a DC experiment over that, I'll get a pseudo-section that looks like this. So for people who kind of understand about wings and things like that, you think, oh, well, maybe there is something here we could go. But that doesn't really work. Things do get even worse if you have little chunks of material up top, so little bits of conductive stuff here. And now the pseudo-section looks like this. So now it really is mock. Now you can make no interpretation from that whatsoever. And here's another example. It's got a bit of topography on it, and it's got a couple of conductors. And the pseudo-section looks like this. It would be tempted along the base of the pseudo-section to drill through here, but that would put you right through here. It's not what you want. So again, we need to come back to inversion. And so we're going to take these data, put them in through our inversion box, and get out something. In our case of a buried prism, here was the pseudo-section. Here's our recovered resistivity. So that actually looks pretty good, right? So kind of got the block centered in about the right location. It's smooth on the sides, but that's because we were asking for a smooth model from the inversion. And yeah, pretty good representation. It's about a drill hole through there. No problem. I think this was kind of interesting. The one that was, the pseudo-section looks like this, completely garbled up, and now we end up with this as an inverted section. So not only do we get this guy, but we've got these things up here, which maybe they're just geologic noise, but maybe they've actually got some interest attached to them. And then also with our initial model, here's the pseudo-section, inverted, get something that looks like that. And no question about having two targets and going. Okay, so that's the sounding. It's the profiling and sounding. The world is 3D. So lots of things change. We've got the target, size, depth, background, resistivity is changing. So you might have something that kind of looks like that. And yeah, then there's a question like, okay, where do we put the currents? Right? Should the currents be, kind of just in 2D, or what's our acquisition geometry? Is it 3D? Where do I take the measurements? Which measurements? And what's the effects of topography? So these are all survey design questions. And really the essential element here is something called sensitivity. So within the context of, let's say, a geophysician inverse problem, if I ask somebody to say, okay, what do we mean by the word sensitivity? What would you say? Anybody? Jamie.
Sensitivity?
Yeah.
Well, it's I think it's exactly what it means. Like the cells with high sensitivity, you change them just a little bit, and that has a big effect on the beta that are very sensitive to those cells. And cells that have no sensitivity, like a 10 kilometers depth under your pole by pole survey, you can make it any value you want, and it will have no effect on the beta. So,
perfect. Perfect. We've got those gold stars, right? Yeah. Well, you can tell Jamie comes from you. Yes. Okay. So sensitivity is kind of relating to how what the effects of changing a parameter of the model is on the data. So let's suppose we've got something here, and maybe it's just a cell, as Jamie was talking about, or maybe it's the value of whatever resistivity you've got here, or maybe it's the boundary thing. Doesn't matter. Whatever your parameter is, then what is the ratio of the change in the subsequent datum to that change in the parameter? If it's high and has a high sensitivity, and you're like, okay, that's really important, whatever that parameter is, that's an important parameter. If it's low, then you're just not sensitive. Now, generally this is all thrown into one, and people will plot sensitivity maps and things like that. But if you're in a survey design, you're actually much, much better off to split this into two parts. So you want to collect data that are sensitive to a target. Then there's two elements. The first is you need to excite the target. That's the first part. You don't worry about the data at all. You just like, okay, can I excite that target? And then the next one is, okay, now I need to measure something. I need to have a sensor that is somehow close to that target and measuring the right field. So we're going to always kind of break these things up into two parts. And you see, when you do that, the whole concept of the survey design actually becomes a little bit simpler than if you just go directly to kind of plotting out sensitivity meters. So let's go back to exciting the target. Here's one here. We had our cylinder, and it's, yeah, I mean, clearly we were actually doing a good job, right? So in here are all these charges that we're built up. So we're good. That is a good set of currents for exciting this particular one. So those potentials kind of gave rise to something that was looking at here. So here's the secondary potentials and the total values. Right. So our measurements, okay, now kind of depend upon, so having ignited this body, how close we are to here. So we can see that this guy here is actually going to have a pretty good sized datum just because I'm kind of close to those charges. So the two things are, the first one, excite the body, right? So now I do that, and now how am I going to measure? Well, I'm, clearly the closer my voltage probe is to these charges, the better I'm going to be. It'd be better to be right down here, but if I'm stuck up at the surface of the Earth, then really kind of close here makes some sense. With respect to excitation, there's a real important element. It's kind of often just put into the term coupling. So we had talked about a sphere or a cylinder before, but now let's suppose I've got a plate. And so I've got an A, that goes to B. And now I've got currents that are going through. So my currents are coming through. So you can see they're kind of deflecting in a little bit, and they're going through. And if I take this plate and I change the orientation of it, you can see how now the currents are really changing. So I'm exciting these plates in very different ways, and effectively, just by the orientation of the plate, it's coupling with the primary fields a little bit differently. So you can see how that geometry is important. And the other thing that's important is whether, so that kind of tells you about coupling, but the other is like, okay, do I have a resistive plate or do I have a conductive plate? So look what happens in here. So suppose I've got a conductive plate. So I'm coming now, currents are going to get sucked in a little bit. And I am changing things. So there is a charge that is being built up. So, I'm still, it's still a good experiment from the point of view of sensitivity. But look to see what happens when I have a resistive plate. So now in a resistive plate, the currents are deflected around, so there's a lot of deflection. And so there has to be a lot of charges that are built up. And notice the strength of the charges. There's two things here that are important. One is that when I change from a conductor to a resistor, I'm changing the strength of the signal. So I'm going to be better off with this particular measurement seeing a resistive plate than a conductor. And secondly, notice that the charges are different. So in here, the negative charges here positive. Here, they're reversed. So yeah, quite a few things happening just because one thing is conductive and the other is resistive. So our summary with respect to sensitivity, we need to excite the body. So we've got to drive currents in, and we need good coupling. For the data, we want to be close to wherever that excitation is happening, and the number that we're going to measure is going to depend on how close the electrodes are, and actually where we're measuring a potential difference, like to have one end maybe close to here and one farther here is going to give us a bigger number. And yeah, so those are those quantities here. And the other thing that we'll talk about in a bit is the importance of the background. So now let's try to kind of come up just a little bit. So we got survey design questions. So again, always, what's the objective? Okay, is the Earth 1D? If it is 1D, no problem, do sound. Is it 2D, and do we know the geology? Well, if so, we can do that kind of profiling and sounding as we saw earlier. But if it's 3D, you need 3D coverage. That means you need to be able to excite the object from all kinds of directions. And when you don't know what the shape of the object is, what the background is, you basically just got to go out and kind of blanket things so that you've got potential rays coming in from all different angles, which is now gradually what the what the community is realizing and going. One of the things we haven't talked about is the background resistivity and also noises, like power lines, fences, and things like that. When it comes to survey design, at a certain point, things just simply get complicated, and really you have to appeal to numerics. And so here's the general steps. They work for simple problems, they work for more complicated problems, but if you are trying to think of, like, okay, should I take a datum with a transmitter here and measuring, having some receiver and measuring some datum over here, really the only way that you can do that, or to make that assessment, is through numerical simulation. So suppose you've got an Earth model here and you've got some ore bodies here. So these are your targets that you're looking for. This is what you do. I mean, you've got your geology, find whatever it is, assign whatever physical properties you've got to that. Now you select your survey, just try something. And then you simulate with and without the target. So with the target might be the red line, without the target is the blue line. And then you look to see, okay, where is there a difference? Okay, so if you've got subtracting these two, you get some difference. And if this is large enough, then okay, that's a good datum. I better make sure I collect that. And the large enough thing kind of is in two aspects. One is that certainly that has to be larger than some noise floor that you're working with, and that's going to depend upon your environment and everything else. And the other, generally, for most measurements, it has to be at least a certain percentage of your primary fields, because especially when you've got data that vary by many orders of magnitude, usually there's a description that the uncertainty is, like 1% of the primary or 0.5% of the primary or something like this. So those are the two things. You need to look at the difference and then assign to see if that's larger to some base round or base level or some percentage. So I'm going to show you a short case history. This is old case history, but I'm actually extremely proud of it because it was one of the first 3D DCIP inversions that were done. And it's in a place called Mount Isa in Australia. And yeah, as I said, it was one of the first that we did, and certainly it was applied to a mineral exploration. So I'd like to kind of show it to you. And it's one of those things that withstood the test of time. So it's Mount Isa. Sometimes it's called the Cluny aspect, and it's up here in northern Australia. So here's the geologic model. It really doesn't matter very much about the details of these units. They're different colors, they're different units. There's a couple of guys that are important. One is that there's kind of siltstones back in here, both the blue and the purples, in which there could be mineralization. So there's mineralization someplace up in here. There's some volcanics that are coming up here, but that's kind of it. Someplace in here there's hopefully mineralization. And there's also something out here, it's a breakaway shale or a black shale that's happening. And at this point here in the presentation for the day, the question is whether or not we can find a conductive unit within these siltstones. Can we find that with a DC resistivity survey? Okay. So let's take a little bit closer look at the physical properties. The thing that we're looking for, the mineralization, it's going to be the Mount Novot horizon, which is it's a high. Now we're talking conductivity here because the numbers are really huge. So these are conductivity, so it's very high conductivity. And that is to be compared with these native, well, the siltstones that are hosting it have a moderate conductivity. And then there's also volcanics that have very low conductivity. Okay, so there's three. The fly in the ointment here is that there's another unit called the breakaway shale, or black shale, that's very high conductivity. So the thing that we're looking for is not the highest conductivity, but something that's higher conductivity than a lot of the other surrounding rocks. The geology is pretty much 2D. It's very striking along this direction. So what they did, they basically did 2D acquisition. So this allows us to, well, allows them to take data along 10 lines, and along each of those lines, they can now get a pseudosection of data. So they did a pole-dipole experiment. So the current is out here. And then here's now the pseudosection, which we saw. And if you look through these 10 pseudosections, the red is conductive. So this is like 1,400 millisiemens per meter. It's more than 1 Siemens per meter on the conductivity scale. And you can see there's something happening out here. There's something really conductive, but there's 10 images. And now, remember I talked about exciting bodies? So if we have a current on this side, you know, we're always kind of going to be exciting something from one direction, but we want to excite things from multiple directions. So we could do the other. We could do the, put the current on this side, and then excite here. And now I get different pictures. Pseudosections are different. And you notice also that there's something really conductive that's coming up in here. Okay, so now I've got 20 pictures. What's the geology? So what we're going to do is we're going to take those guys and we're going to do a 3D DC resistivity inversion. So it's the same thing. We're going to take a cube, divide it in a whole bunch of little pixels, squares, And each of those has a random or an unknown electrical conductivity. We're just going to adjust them so it fits all these equations. Do that, we get this volume here. It's up here. So what you're seeing here, this is the result of the inversion. It's a 3D cube, okay? And the red is conductive, the blue is resistive. And in order to display it, we're going to just slice the cube in this direction, and then slice the cube in plan view. And then it's going to start rotating around, but the isosurface level is going to change, and we're only going to be able to see that thing that is most conductive. So at the end, we're going to end up with just an image of the most conductive part. So you can see that big conductor on the right. So that's where we end up with. So there's this massive conductor in here. There's a little bit of a weaker conductor over here. If we actually transform that to some kind of color image, it looks like that. From a geologic perspective, this is great, right? I mean, we've taken those 20 pseudo-sections, we've converted it, and now we actually have something that looks geologic. So we've got a 3D, it's a 3D physical property model. It's got some, geologic interpretation. This guy here is actually that black shale unit. He's kind of, unfortunately, he's the biggest kid in the block, but he's not what's mineralized. So this is the breakaway shale unit. And there was a bit of a moderate conductor that was coming in here. That turns out to be the guy who is interesting, but he doesn't really light up very much with this. But this is not the end of the story. The end of the story is going to come actually at the end of the day. We're going to come back and revisit this, and we're going to look at the IP part of it. And we'll see that the Mount Nova horizon that we're really interested in is not only conductive, but it also is chargeable. And in this case, the chargeability is the guy that really makes this interesting. But at this particular point, we have here, I think, very much a geophysical success in the sense of being able to acquire three-dimensional data, convert data over a three-dimensional region, and get out something that looks geologic. And this guy here is certainly big kid on the block, and there's other information that's coming. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, I'm not going to go through this one. I think this might be of marginal interest, but I'm going to flip. But basically, it's the following. If anybody, because this is a mining, it's a mining industry, but this people are interested in embankment and containment dams, right? This is an issue. So here is an example in France where they're looking at the use of self-potentials for monitoring a dam. And more as we're going around the world, we're seeing that people are progressively more interested in this. I just had a scientist from Korea visit, and he was like, they've got 17,000 dams. They're not huge, but they're holding water, and they've got a map, worry about the integrity of them. And the idea with these embankment dams is that if you've got, so this is the water over here, here's your dam, so here's the downstream side. And if you've got any kind of conduit that's going through here, then you can get fluid flow. And fluid flow will give rise to a self-potential. So effectively, it's like the buildup. And why it's in here, it's like the buildup of charge. You're just building up positive and negative charges here, and you can just measure the electric potential around the outside of this dam, and then you can invert that to estimate what the streaming potential is and get the currents that are moving in here. And actually, ultimately, with a little bit of extra information, get the velocity or the volume of fluid per minute that's actually flowing through. So this is a very bright thing. People are starting to instrument dams more and more. I don't know whether tailings dams for the mining industry, whether they're really monitoring them in this sense, but there is potential here. Tim. Okay, so this. Okay, so I hadn't elaborated. We talked a little bit about background resistivity. Let's just look a little bit more. So what I want to do now is take this example that we had before, and when it was just sitting like this, and we did this experiment here, measured the potentials up here, got this low apparent resistivity, which was good, indicating that this thing might be, there might be a bit of a conductor down there. But now the question is, so what's going to happen? Suppose I take this, okay, take this reading up here, and now I'm just going to put in a little, just a little layer. Okay, I'm going to put a little layer in here, and I'm going to make it resistive. Okay, I'm going to put a little resistive layer. What is going to happen to this whole scenario as far as my ability to see the this conductor? Okay, so what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? I'm going to take just a little, like a 1 meter layer, thick layer here, make it really resistive. What's going to happen? Mark?
If you make this layer too many resistive,
yeah,
no current, that's true. But it's not, in a way, you decrease your signal of the conductors. With too resistive, in the limit, no current will pass through the resistive layer, but it's more difficult to pass. It should start just not the limit, but so just thinking on resistive layer, it's hard to pass any current through this. So you decrease your signal of the conductive body.
Perfect. Okay, everybody agree? Anybody? Well, I've already said perfect, so I'm just saying. Okay, so I'm going to put a little resistor in here. And now what's going to happen? So it's high resistive. But now my DC resistivity, so the currents, they cannot penetrate this, right? So they're going to be channeled entirely up here. And then I'm really not getting anything down into my area that I'm interested in. Notice also the apparent resistivity, 1600. That 1600 is really just a reflection of the fact that I've got this resistor in here. I can tell you why that is, because if I do the modeling without the conductor, I still get the same high apparent resistivity. So I'm a resistive layer, a thin resistive layer with DC resistivity, you're hooked. Okay, so this is really important, and this is going to set up, okay, I need something else, right? So here's where the EM induction layer is going to come from. Right? So here's a place where what happens if I put a conductive layer in? Pardon me?
Worst.
Worst?
Yeah, to channel your current.
Right. Right. So if I put in, so what happened here is that all the currents were flowing above there, right? Now if I put in a conductive layer in here, everything gets channeled in. Irrespective, nothing goes down here. I get a low, I get a low value of resistivity, but that's only because I got a conductor, right? So this is done. So the takeaway here is that either way, with a your background host is really going to be important, right? I've got something I'm looking there, but I just happen to have a big air crack with a boy. Well, he was a small one, right? But just enough to prevent the current from crossing, or if I've got a really thin sheet or something, either way I can really mess up my ability to see that. So that takes us then. So that now kind of sets the need for doing something else, and that introduces why we might want to do EM. So coffee is at 10, I guess. This is good. We've never done so well.
Yeah. Question about the difference between photos and photo. How can visibility in actual certain matrix? Can we basically discriminate between sensitivity of these two parameters? How we can basically split this, see the effect separately?
For me, what I would do is I would look at the at all of the sort of the charges and the currents, just to see, see if we're seeing something, and then from that to get an idea about where you would want to measure. Okay, so that kind of provides an overall understanding. But from the value of really trying to see whether it's useful, I just have to go back to that numerics, right? I have my transmitter to set something up, and then now I've got my fields that are coming from there, so I just have to look at the fields and see, if I'm.
What kind of company?
There's no sure.
Actual splitting, you cannot basically make a set of sensitivity for example, your source distribution and the set of sensitivity based on your receiver.
Not easily.
No, I can't.
Yeah. Pardon me? Oh, perfect. So let's give this a shot. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Everyone. People in the past have said to me that penetration of the DC resistivity survey is a function of electrode spacing and it's all about geometry. And I guess at one level that's correct in terms of the pseudo sections, but what you're telling me makes more sense with my world, which is everyone that it's critically constrained by the conductivity distribution, right?
Yes. So if you have a homogeneous ground, okay, then there's a lot of intuition you can do with respect to thinking about how far apart your electrons are, depth of investigation, things like that. But really, the problem is nonlinear, and those currents can get reflected a way to prevent it from going into someplace, depending on that background.
And then you can move your electrodes as far as you like, and if you've got a shallow conductive.
Exactly. And then here you root the roots, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well let's just do a little of this. So why might we want to do EM? Well, we're going to do EM in places where DC municipality is difficult. So that could be large areas to be recovered, like 100 kilometers. Or here's a case where we just had a bad background. Maybe it's just hard to inject current into the ground, and you've got rugged terrain. There's just a whole bunch of places that you can see. Now, DC municipality could be. So what we want to do is to kind of go through some of the basics here, and just kind of set up the scene. And we're going to look at two things: Ampere's law and Faraday's law, and yeah, some simple circuit models. So here's the basic experiment. We've got a transmitter and a receiver. In this case, they're going to be towed in a bird. Don't have to be. But here's a transmitter here, here's a receiver. And the transmitter has a current in it, and it puts out a time-varying magnetic field, and those magnetic fields can be measured at a receiver. So that's sort of the primary. Those time-varying magnetic fields also induce currents inside a body. And those currents are going to give rise to magnetic fields that are observed. So those are called secondary. So we got a primary field for the transmitter, we got induced currents in here, and we got secondary currents. Okay? So let's just take a little bit of a look. We have a transmitter. It could be either time domain waveform or frequency. As I said at the beginning, we're actually, by the end of the day, you're just going to see that, okay, time, frequency, domain, they're basically the same. There's some practical consequences that might make them choose one or the other, but the physics is completely the same. So here's our transmitter operating here with a loop of wire and giving rise to this. The equations that we deal with are these. Now we actually have things that are varying in time. And so we've got these equations here, which have this one in particular has got a DT. There's a one-time variation, or time variation here, which we're going to do that. D is the electric displacement. It depends on the electric field and the electrical permittivity. We're going to ignore that for now. And essentially, the term that comes, or when people kind of refer to that, is they'll often call it a quasi-static field. So it's not, it's sort of almost static. So just going to be static. So let's just look at Ampere's law. So that basically says that if I've got a current, I've got a magnetic field. Not only that, I not only have a magnetic field, I've got a curl. So that triangle business means that I've got a curl. It means that there's something circular that's happening. And the circularity is something that you already are very familiar with. If I have a current here's a wire, I've got a current, then you know that the magnetic field is circular around that curve, around that wire, and that is governed by the right-hand rule. Okay. So, and here's the magnetic expression for the magnetic field also, big part. If I take that wire and I move it in on itself and make a loop of wire, then I've got a magnetic field that looks like this, and it looks just like that of a dipole, like a little bar. And the strength of that magnet is given by this. It's called the magnetic moment, and it's equal to the product of the current times the area of the loop. So that's the magnetic moment, sort of the strength of the transfer. And magnetic field is given by, there's two important quantities here. One is this magnetic moment strength, and the other, notice it falls off as 1 over r cubed. So that's a really important thing, that the fields are always going to fall off on the cube in this kind of substitution. Okay, so that's Faraday's law takes this. It says if I've got a time-varying magnetic flux, okay, then that is going to give rise to an electric field. Again, there's a circularity, there's a current, or there's a orientation associated with it. And there's also a minus sign in here, which is important for helping us understand which way the currents are actually going to go. And then there's Ohm's law tells us if I have an electric field and a conductor, that I've got a current density. So this is kind of Faraday's law summed up, and that's what's going to tell us about the induced currents. So just how those work again, you're seeing all this in, I don't know, your grade 8 physics course or something, or science course. But here's a little circuit. So we've got a coil here, and then we've got a light bulb, and we've got a voltmeter, and we've got a magnet. So this magnet has got magnetic field lines that sort of emanate out like this. And if the magnet is just sitting here, okay, there's magnetic lines of flux that go through, but there's nothing that is changing. So an important quantity is the magnetic flux. And that's just given by this relationship here. It's the integral over some area of the normal component of B over that area. So in here, so here's the magnetic field lines that are coming like this. We just look at the normal component as it's crossing this loop, integrate that out, and that gives us the total flux. The induced EMF in this coil is given by the time rate of change of that flux. So in this case here, the magnet is sitting right out here, now it's changing, so dBT is equal to 0, so that there's no EMF or voltage that's induced. So the current and voltage is just going to be 0. However, the moment that I move that magnet, so if I push it in, now there's an increase in the flux because it's getting stronger. So the flux is increasing, so this quantity becomes positive, but I got this negative sign, so this is actually less than 0. So I've got a current now that's going to be traveling in this coil in such a way that it's opposing, it's magnetic field opposes any change. And so there's going to be a current that's going to flow in here, but the light bulb is going to go on. Okay, so time changing flux gives me the current. And now if I do the opposite thing, if I move this guy back again, then now my flux is decreasing. Minus sign makes this value positive, and I get a current that is also going through. So as the magnet is going into and out of the coil, there's constantly an EMF in that coil, which is creating current, and we're going to see the light bulb. We have a number of apps that are really useful for illustrating this. There's two. There's one in the frequency domain and one in the time domain. And basically what they do is look at a two-coil system, one in which there's a primary current in this outer coil, and that's generating a magnetic flux that's coming in onto a target loop here. And that target loop is characterized by having particular resistance and self-inductance. So that's our setup, and then you're allowed to change the number of parameters. So let's just kind of go through what happens in the transient case. So let's look at the primary currents. So let's have a primary current that's going through here, and that current is kind of on, and then we're just going to switch it off. So we're going to take that current that's constantly on, and we'll go, boop, put it off, and so the flux in here is some value while the current's on, and then the flux turns on. Our equivalent circuit model is something that looks like this. So the target loop has got some resistance and some self-inductance, and then there might be some current that's going through. And the amount of that current is whatever is going to be driven by this time rate of change of flux. If I look at the time rate of change of flux, it's just like an impulse. It's the delta function. It's going down, and that immediately is going to set up current in this target loop, and that target, so the initial value of that current is going to be I sub s, and then it's going to decay, e to the minus t upon tau, where tau is a time constant, and in this case is equal to the ratio of L upon R. And so it's just going to come down and go like that. Okay, so that's basically it. I take the time varying field on here, just turn the primary current off. I initially get a current in the loop, and then it just takes it. So if I'm looking at what are called the response function, then this response function just tells us how that current is decaying, so it's e to the minus t upon tau. If I plot it in a log linear plot, I'm just going to get straight lines. So this black line here has got a tau that's really large. Red line's got very small value, like 0.1. So it would look like that. So that's my response function in time. And if I plotted it on a linear plot, then it just had e to the minus 2. I'll probably go straight. So that's my response function in time. So what happens if my signal is harmonic? What happens by the frequency? Well, basically the same. So suppose that I have a primary field that's looking like this. So this is in red. So it's now oscillating, right? So I've got a primary field that's like this. And inside my target loop, I've got to have something that's going to be changing with time. Well, it can't do anything other than change at the same frequency, right? It has no choice. So my current in my target loop has also got to be sinusoidal. So the only thing that can happen is like, okay, what's its amplitude? And then notice how the time for its peak changes compared to the primary. So there's a phase shift in here. Okay? So that's it. So my secondary field must also, if my primary field was cosine omega t, my secondary field must also be like a cosine omega t, but it could be phase shifted a little bit, so there might be a minus 5. And it's got its own amplitude. Okay? So once you see this picture, it's like, oh, okay, that's it. That's all there is. I mean, I've got my secondary current in here, it's just going like that. And this phase shift with respect to time. But I could, now, I could take this curve here, this green one, and decompose it into two other things. One of which had the same phase as the primary, and the other which is out of phase. So if I add this one, I get to the green pattern. So all I'm doing now is, for whatever reason, is taking something that had a particular form, and now I'm just decomposing it into two things, one of which operates just like the primary, and one of which operates completely out of phase. Now we can do that mathematically really easily, right? Because you remember, first year trigonometry, you have cosine of omega t minus psi, and you can break this into both sine and cosine. So you end up taking this in and writing it like this, something times cosine over tan t, and something times sine. Okay? Now, because this variable is cosine, that variable is cosine, we say, well, these two guys are, they're all operating like this, so they're in phase. So the quantity here tells us about the in phase component, and we sometimes actually refer to that. This part out here varies as sine omega t, which is an out of phase with that, and this is down here. So this picture here often is one of the greatest sources of confusion when EM people are talking to mind people, because the words that we use here are kind of multifaceted. So for this guy here, we often refer to him as the in phase or the middle. For these guys here, we refer to out of phase, quadrature, imaginary. They all mean the same thing. They can all be kind of semi-complicated words, so people are not all of this. But that's all they are. And the process here is just absolutely simple. So the only question now from our perspective is this phase, or phase lag, psi. And we can show that psi is given by 2 plus this quantity here, omega L on R. And it doesn't matter what these combinations are, you're going to get the same number of at this number, or composite number. We call this thing the induction number. So when omega gets really large or R gets really small, we're at a really high induction number, and vice versa. Okay, so that's it. This whole business of separating out this secondary field into an in phase and quadrature phase. Just kind of remember this diagram, and then we've got something here called the phase lag. And now you get, if we put all this together, we get probably one of the most iconic diagrams in electromagnetics. This is the response function for a frequency domain system. And this solid curve here is the in phase or real part. So what we're on here, this is induction number, and this is the response. So if you remember, if you come back here, okay, for a particular induction number, we change the phase. If we change the phase, we get more coming into one of these guys than the other. So that's all we're doing now is kind of evaluating this as a function of induction number, and we get that the real part looks like this, and the imaginary part looks like that. Okay, so this is that climb. So in summary, so we've got this response function for a step off. It looks like this, or harmonic, it looks like this. The physics is the same. They're both governed by these equations, and they generate secondary fields. So the secondary fields, let's see. Let's leave it. We'll stick to their time scale for coffee. And we'll So this is an okay place to break and have a short coffee. And we'll do that.
10:30 or you want shorter?
Yeah, how about a little bit shorter.
20 after?
Yeah, could we just do like a 16 or 20 after?
Are you going to address the question about undocumented completely off? Is that the same as that's something that's
In the at really low frequency.
yeah.
Really low frequencies are kind of long. There might be some.
I'm talking about it's getting to the question superconductor. Yes. People say like for the superconductor voice is very completely in the in phase.
Yeah.
And it's not in the off time. It's not in off time. You get it with people. Yeah. But you need an on-time system to detect that. All right? Or you need an on-time system. That's an on-time. Or you need it's in the in phase. And that has to be in phase. Right? Because this is still something that's not really debated. You know?
So as to how you can do it.
Do you sense them at all in time? How much is always off time? Because you sense them fantastically in the frequency, and it's just it's all in phase, zero quad phase, right? So that's what my question is going to. So in an off-time system, which is off-time VDT, is that equivalent to having a frequency domain system, which is only quadrature? It doesn't make sense, you wouldn't have that, but I mean, it's like the off time. The off time in the time domain is analogous to more analogous to quadrature. On time is more analogous to the in phase.
Well, I think there's something in there too.
The question makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if you look at it, because he's bringing this 100%. It's the same as
I look at them. This is the it's true.
Just not getting enough power. For conductivity, it's got a very limited range. And if we can't induce the personal induction, you're not using KT12 better. But still Yeah, it should be fine for the fire stuff too.
Website.
Yeah. Sure.
I think honestly, just even just changed so much as it's more stable. It does. Yes. All right.
Ready to interject two things here. One is that, within the course of the day, we're only going to have a chance to talk about a certain amount of material. The other is that sometimes people ask me questions and I'm not really sure about the answer. However, articulating of the questions is really important. And what I would encourage people to do as we're going through the day, I mean, feel free to ask questions, right? And that's pretty much. But there might be things that people are thinking about, questions that they have that actually are really good to think about and for us to delve on further and could actually foster some sort of more in-depth conversation. So the one that Jane was just talking to me about, what had to do with being able to detect highly conducting bodies with frequency domain systems or time domain systems, and using the on-time and the off-time. And there's been a lot of papers that have been published on this. Richard Smith has talked, Jim McNay has talked about this, contractors are talking about this, and yet there still seems to be, perhaps some sense of questioning about what's going on. And I think this is exactly the kind of thing that would be really useful, and we could capture on GeoSci, our open source resource, where we have a question and maybe even some data, and just to be able to kind of go through the fundamentals and try to, if not answer the question, at least provide some insight about what you need to do in your specific circumstance to help answer that question. I think that could really help both contractors and people who are trying to get somebody to fly a survey and looking for something, just to see if you're on the right page and you're making the right decisions. So as I talked to Jay, I encourage him to just write a piece of paper, just articulate what is the question that is really kind of bugging you, or what is the thing that people are still have some controversy about, and write that down, and you try to work with that. So I've asked Jim, but other people too, because we certainly can't get through everything today, but again, we're trying to get communication. And I also want to say, although I don't, probably not going to attempt to talk very much about Ruby, it's not really very much interested, but there's something called the airwave that, honestly, for a couple of years, people were questioning, okay, does it exist, how do we understand it, and there was all kinds of controversy going on. And yet, by articulating that question, and in some cases, in this case, seeing a movie of what the wavefronts are looking at in the time frame, it's like a no-brainer. It's just like, okay, I got it. It's obvious. So sometimes getting the right question and then just getting the right app or movie or something can just completely answer everything and make it seem simple and give you some time. So I encourage you to do that. The other thing we're going to ask you to do, we're not going to ask you to do that today, but we're in one of the follow-up emails to what were follow-up emails for today. But we're going to ask each person to express one item that they'd like to have on an EM wish list. Things that, from your perspective, what is it that you would like to see as far as an advancement in EM or understanding of EM or something? Just, I don't know, maybe kind of accumulating those as we're going around the world. It's kind of interesting. Just like, okay, what is it that you would like to see? So what we were at responses. Remember we had a time off in a transit system, and that gave us these time domain responses that were like this, and the harmonic signals, and we saw that our, because the primary is always on, the secondary occurrence of this form here, we can divide the particular goes into an in phase and a quadrature phase apart. Then this induction number, here is the response function curve, and that was kind of it. The main difference in frequency and time is that in frequency domain, the primary signal is always on. So our secondary, now we've got currents in here. So those currents are going to give rise to magnetic fields that we could measure afterwards. And we can measure those currents again with the fields. People with the internet have heard all kinds of different sensors. They continue to be developed. But basically, you can either measure B, let's say with clock state, or you can measure dPdt with the quantum system. And then depending upon the orientation of this, you get one number that's associated with it. thing that we haven't talked about yet is coupling for the EM. But we did talk about flux that was going through. So once you understand flux, then coupling becomes a simple issue. So if I had a transmitter here, I got my negative flux is coming through here. So you can see this part is actually perfectly coupled with that. So the integral of B by M is fine. And similarly here too. But if I'm looking here, the magnetic field lines are going parallel to the plane plate, so there's no flux through that plate, so there's no voltage, so there's no current. So this is all coupled. That's perfectly coupled. We're now going to actually put things together. And I think this is also kind of interesting because I remember the first time I saw this equation, it caused me to think a little bit about what was going on. So what we're trying to do here now is to emulate or understand what the responses would be if I have a transmitter, I've got a target, and a receiver. So I'm going to get eddy currents in here. We're going to replace them by 3 loops. So there's going to be a transmitter loop here, and the target loop is loop 2, and the receiver is loop 3. And what I'm wanting to do is to get the information or the energy from here to here, and we saw just in the previous slide that that amount of energy depends upon the coupling. So it's kind of a like a geometrically related thing. It just depends on one thing is going with respect to the other. And we can get the coupling coefficient between loop 1 and loop 2 just by geometry and this equation. So that gives us this coupling. And then these curves here have to couple with this receiver. So now the thing that we're really interested in as we're kind of flying over is the ratio of the secondary field to the primary. So that's what we want. We're measuring over here, what's the ratio of each? Well, you can basically write it down. Right? First of all, I got to get the energy from from this loop to here. So for my secondary field, it's got to get it down from here. So that's going to be an M12 and then an M2 here. So that's what these 2 guys are. And then the primary is just tries to get from here to here. So that's that coupling coefficient. So that's the stuff out here. And then, I've got a target down here, right? So now there's a response. So there's my response. But this all fits in as you look at this. It's really nice that you can look at an equation and you see each term in the equation here, and you've got a physical understanding about what each of them does and that's it. And so the reaction number here controls that response. So what happens now if I'm taking a loop system? I'm going to take a transmitter and a receiver, and I'm just going to move it over a target body. So let's look at a target body here. Then what am I expecting? Well, if I have let's suppose this is my transmitter, I've got a time varying magnetic field that's going through here, right? And so now I've got a time varying flux here. It's not going to get a current that is coming through here. And that current's going to be flowing in like this and flowing in such a way that the magnetic flux current opposes any change. So I'm going to have on this side a positive magnetic field coming from the primary, and I'm going to have a positive that comes from here in the same direction. And so it's going to give me some kind of it's going to be, the whole time I would say it's positive. The secondary and the primary are going in the same direction. I'm going to plot them as positive. If they're in the reverse direction, they're going to plot as negative. So as I'm coming over over here. So I get over the target body. I get something that looks like this. So the question is, I've got 2 zero crossings that are, so I've got 2 places that the data are going to be 0. And so I'm telling why this is the transmitter, this is the receiver, why I'm going to get either the first 2 crossing or the second. Why is this going to go to 0 when I'm sitting, or under what conditions is that going to be? The transmitter on this side.
Minimize error for the upright.
Right, so when so when I've got this guy here sitting right over top, right? So when the magnetic fields are kind of coming up like that, so they're going to be parallel to the plane of the loop, so there's no flux. Now I've got no flux condition through my loops, I have no secondary fields, so I'm going to get 0. I've got another 0 over here that's coming about from Y. Okay.
That's the same situation, just further off like that receiver.
Yeah, so now my transmitter is sitting right over here, so my transmitter is null coupled. So I have 2 null couplings. I have 2 zero values. One's a null coupling with the secondary fields. The other is null coupling with the transmitter and the target point. So kind of 2 different things. But the bottom line is, now I'm going to get perfect or something. And that curve is characteristic. That's basically geometry. The physics part of it now comes into, like, notice I've got a red and a black line and kind of dashed here. What I'm looking at is a situation where the induction number is 1. And the induction number is 1, the real and imaginary parts are the same. So this is both the real and the imaginary. If I make the induction number smaller, so I'm now sitting on this side, notice that my response curve, the imaginary part is larger than the real. So that's going to see here. Now here's my response. I looked at my EM31 or whatever you're going to do over here. The curves would come out like this, with the imaginary part being higher than the real. And if I went the other way to a higher reduction number, the real is perfect. Okay? So you got a couple of things going on. We've got a lot of geometry that's playing a role, and then these kind of mutual couplings. And then in addition to that, you've got the stuff that's going on with the target, which is all connected with this response function. And importantly, whether you're at an induction number larger than 1 or less than 1, they determine which of these axes. What happens in the time domain? Well, the time domain, we have the same curve, right? Because frequency, time, doesn't matter, geometry is the same. So the only thing that's happening in time is that the amplitude of that signature progressively decreases as time decreases, because our response function just gets smaller. Well, what's happening in time? Just get the same character curve as a function of time, but it's smaller. Okay, so what have we learned? Well, we've got a big stuff about response functions, mutual coupling, and I've got the idea that the circuit model, even though it's really simple, maybe it's actually kind of, the question is it applicable to geometry? If we wanted to test that, we could do that by, first of all, let's just do a numerical simulation. So let's take a sphere it's going to be really quite conductive area and receiver, transmitter right above. And if we get the circuit model, we ended up with response functions like this. If we now do the numerical model, we end up with something that looks pretty similar. So from the point of view of circuit model and something that's a bit more realistic numerical computation, you get the same kind of features. So you start to get the idea that, okay, even the physics is picked up from the circuit model. I want to mention that that picture that you just saw was generated with a it's called a SIL code, cylindrically symmetric code. This has been developed by Lindsay and Sonny and others at UBC. It's open source Python code. It's built on SIMMIC. And there's two formative papers, but it's one of these codes that's actually remarkably versatile. In fact, the problem that we were just talking about, one could make a big headways on solving most of the questions that you're talking about by using this SIL code, because a sphere is, in fact, axially symmetric, and if you had a transmitter that was above the sphere and has a certain loop, then everything would be on axis and axially symmetric, and this can handle arbitrarily large conductivity and magnetic permeability. So this is a very, very versatile program, and in fact, using it a lot for looking at steel casings and effects of permeability and all kinds of things. So this is made now freely available. You can, some are open source resources. Welcome to give it to instead. So we're actually doing pretty well. We've not accounted for one particular item, and that is we've got to get the energy from the transmitter down to the ground and from the ground back up to the receiver. So now the question is, okay, what about that energy propagation? How do we extend it that? What is its impact? That brings us to how EM fields and fluxes behave in the background. So here's Maxwell's equations again. So in first order, they're like this. We can combine them into second order. And actually, there's two parts to the second order equation. This is the diffusion part. This is the quasi-static. And this is the wave propagation. This is kind of the GPR part. So up to now, what we've been doing is quasi-static. So we're kind of pretty good at that. If we take these equations and we Fourier transform, we end up with what's called a vector Helmholtz equation. This one in K is something called a wave number. Now, in the quasi-static regime, we're going to assume that this first term is actually much smaller than this guy. And that's going to allow us to write K in this particular form here. So we can write it in this complex. So this is a wave number, so it's e to the I, k, z, right, as far as your solution. And so when we think about this and put it into our tiny wave solution, we end up that we've got that the magnetic field, as it's propagating down the segment, its amplitude, it varies with depth, and it varies with. What are we looking at here? So we're talking plane wave. So remember, so a plane wave is something that, imagine you've got a plane, okay? And the phase at every point is exactly the same. So nothing is changing on that wave, and it's propagating down. And one way to think physically about how you make that is imagine you just have a great big current sheet. So big current sheet, so the electric field would be going in one direction, symmetric, and the magnetic field would be going perpendicular to that, and this whole thing is just going to propagate down. That's kind of what we see here. We got a current sheet up here, electric field going this way, magnetic field going this way, and then it's propagating. So we put in our wave number here, We got two things. And the big thing is the alpha at this point here, because it's e to the minus alpha z, and that means it's attenuating with that. If you plot the amplitude of this as a function of that, it has this kind of exponential decay with a quantity that's very important. It's called the skin depth. It's the depth in the earth at which that field is decayed to 1 over e of its alpha. It's this thing. It's given by this particular formula. That's an important part because as we're talking about energy propagating in, by the time it got to 1 over e, like 1 over 2.7, that's a fair reduction. And by the time it propagates back, that's another 120, so it's almost at 10. So a skin depth is a pretty important quantity for kind of quantifying how deep your energy is. In the time domain, our equations look like this. There's two plots here, and you have to follow your physical understanding. And the first is that suppose I'm curved and I do a shut off. Okay? So I'm shutting things off. So the moment that I shut things off, as far as Jen is concerned, I'm feeling nothing's happening. But there will be a little bit of time later that she'll, start to rise in that magnetic field, right? And then it'll reach a peak, and then it's going to come down. So as far as you're concerned, it's just like this wave that kind of comes out. The other thing is that at a particular time, I can turn this pulse off, and then at a particular time, I can take a snapshot. And then I look at the magnetic field at any place inside. And so now we're actually looking at the depth, it's the magnitude, and at some particular time, the magnetic field would look like this, and there would be a peak here. That's our particular depth. That peak corresponds to what we refer to as the diffusion distance, and it's given by this particular formula. So people will talk about, okay, given a particular conductivity, so this is the background, this is the time, okay, that this wave is diffused in so much. So you can tell that, all that's going to do is kind of make it sort of a box of it, okay, right? So it tells you that in this case it's going to be 7 meters depth, okay? But there is actually energy, surface word and arc and product depth. Diffusion distance. So two things: state depth, diffusion distance. And both given by. Oh, we have some apps. There's a FineWave app that allows you to look at a curve sheet, look to see what the weight of propagation is as a function of that. And then you can look to see what's happening and the real measured part of amplitude phase and see what you look at. Let's look now at the effects of this background resistance. So suppose I have this target here. So let's say target, and I want to look to see how things are going to proceed when I change the background conductivity. Okay, so right now, we've got a transmitter that's sitting up here. So this is actually all going to be developed with this 2D silicon. So I've got a transmitter up here, and I've got this conductive body here, 2 siemens per meter. And background is basically free space, 10 to the minus 8 siemens per meter. And I'm going to shut this guy off, shut the transmitter off, and I'm going to look at 10 to the minus 5 seconds, so 10 microseconds. And I'm going to see, okay, how about what's happening in the sphere? Where's the curves? So here's the currents. You're on the outside edge of the sphere. It's 10 to the minus 5 seconds. So let me first ask the question. We're kind of thinking about energy coming in and transmitters up here. So why is it that you just see currents on the outside? How do you see kind of currents kind of coming in and then? Good. So remember the diffusion distance, okay? So that diffusion distance depended upon the square root of t upon sigma. So if sigma is really big, even at 10 to the minus 5 seconds, it's barely had time to go in. So initially, that's this power. If we went later in time, we would expect that these might go further in. Okay, so now we're going to make the background conductivity increase. So instead of 10 to the minus 8, we're going to make it 10 to the minus 2. So what's going to happen? I make this more conductive, what's going to happen? Okay, there's a lot of, I think, pretty good stuff. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to increase this to 10 to the minus 2, so it's 100 meters. Not so bad. And I look at that, and nothing really has changed. The counterintuitive, we thought something less than that. So what we would have thought of it, Mark, what would you have expected to happen? Yeah, so more of attenuation here. But, so you're absolutely right, except that the conductivity of the background hasn't been increased enough, right? So remember how fast everything diffuses through and how much it attenuates kind of depends upon the background conductivity. So even though we increase the conductivity 6 orders of magnitude, went from 10 to the minus 8 to 10 to the minus 2, it still wasn't enough. But now we increase it to 0.1, and now we're going to start to see, so these are the effects that Mark was talking about, right? So now we're starting to see induction in this region up here, and we're not seeing so much. Right, so kind of, it's not much more, yes?
How should it go to contrast between the background and the background? Yes.
Not really in this case. It's really mostly just how much you can actually get in juice in here, and you just have a certain amount that's attenuated, and then by the time it gets through here, it just cares about what the conductivity is. So it's not so much of a conductivity contrast. That conductivity contrast would be more with respect to a galvanic current. That was a good question. And now if I increase it even more, I'm blinded, right? So here's Australia. Some other robot down there, that's what you see. Yeah, so we put that together, and we see, okay, so free space, we're got background content, it's still existed, start to increase here now. Actual equations can't decide whether, you know, that this is important versus this or not, so you just get it used first, and then make it higher, initially, yeah. So what happens, so that's time domain, right? So what happens in the frequency domain? Well, I keep telling you, there's no difference, frequency, time frequency, same. So let's look to see now at high frequency 10 to the 4th hertz. Look at the currents, there they are. Kind of look same as you see here. I made the background conductivity 10 to the -2, that's what I get. Background conductivity 10 to the -1, person use here, and 1 is 3. Okay, so exactly the same pictures. If I hadn't annotated anything up here, you would have been able to tell me whether I was looking at a step off after you know, in time, at a particular time, or whatever. So here's the effects. Okay, so what did we learn? There's nothing. You account for energy losses, certain model through the proxy, kind of got an idea about response functions, mutual coupling, basics of VM. So let's do examples. So here's what I think we can do today. We'll see. We've already seen one accent. I'm going to do a time domain example for back in data terms for water. There's deposit central Canada Layout, and we're going to invert the Helisam data. There's a Magdalena mineral deposit. There is, so these are all kind of time domain. And there's a frequency domain, salinization problem in Australia. And I'm going to wrap this up with a really nice example by Frank McMillan of the BBC, looking at West Plains in northern Canada. And that's got a combination of time domain and frequency. So this will kind of take us back to showing, you know, either time and frequency and variance. Then, this afternoon we're going to go to the grounded sources. So these are all the inductive sources. And then we're going to go to the grounded sources. And the grounded source is kind of interesting because it's a combination of DC and a combination of induction. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on. You'll have a lot of fun just kind of trying to figure out which way everything is going. I'm going to apply that to a single example for larger scale photonics for India. When we go to the hydrocarbon industry, we spend most of our time on grounded sources because they're interested in marine EM, they're interested in airwaves and all kinds of stuff. We will then move on to the natural sources. So here's where we'll do Santa Cecilia, and we've got sort of synthetic examples for Santa Cecilia for CSAMT and Miranda for Zetan, as well as the Control. And then I want to talk a little bit about EM decoupling and how we get some of the more recent work that's come out from UBC. And also a project that we have been working on for the last few years is a timberland exploration project where we're able, I believe, one of the most recent advances in this, to take multi-kinds of airborne data and to invert all of them in 3 dimensions and generate a geophysical rock model, which is then included proxies for geometry. And then we're taking normalizing. Okay, so that's where we're going to go. Sources. Yes, so this next one is a bit of a challenge. We started off, I think we had, we started out, I think we had like 70 slides. It is now up to 180 slides or something. So sometimes it doesn't even open up. So, inductive sources. So why? Some of the motivation that we had earlier. Yeah, shielding problems, drain size. So we're going to look a little bit at the sort of the general setup, and then do some timing, and then we'll follow up. So here's some questions that you're addressing. So now we want to move into inductive source. Again, it's always the fundamental question of trying to decide what it is you really want, what do you know. So target, set surface, depth, 1D, 2D, 3D. Now, where am I going to put the transmitter? Surface from here. What's the waveform? Path frequency. What's everything inside? We saw coupling's really important, right? So what's the orientation of the object inside the earth? What's my orientation of my transmitter? I really got like a site, target, so all the issues of coupling are important. And then if I'm excited to get started, then okay, what fields do I want to measure? And the page, component, an instrument, and it's this almost never-ending sequence of questions that are to be addressed on a case basis, depending upon what you're looking for. And basically, the question, the thing with all of these questions, they kind of fall into that concept of survey attempt. So let's just look at the basic experiment we've already been through, primary fields and skirts, and fields and receiver. Transmitter, well, kind of depends what you're up against. If you've got large areas or if you've got rugged terrain, then certainly something that's airborne is a really good idea. So here's a resolve, it's a frequency domain system, project system, pattern. If you've got a big target, like we had at Laylor, it's down kilometer or more deep, and you want to energize it, you need a big dipole moment, so you have to have So the thing, the key about the transmitter is, in fact, it's one of the things, is the power. So the moment is important. I said before, it's current times area. You can also have round a couple of extra turns and increase things that way. And then sometimes you just need to lay out like a really big loop. So this one is a couple of kilometers. And the important thing to remember, there's two things that are always important to remember. One is that, if you've got a loop source, the dipole, it's flowing off this quantum molecule. So that's always to keep in mind. And then you have this additional attenuation with respect to the amperes. You want to be as close as possible, so that means, ideally, ground-based system. Next, helicopter, and third is fixed wing. All these things get you progressively closer and farther away from the object, and that's pretty well. Gauge receiver, we're offered there. It's just a huge variety. That's to say, we basically use field receivers or measure. So in the time domain, the good news about time domain is that the primary field has an off time. So the transit field turn it off, and then just measure the secondary fields. And the receivers could be mounted, well, they could be mounted on the transmitter, or they could be above the transmitter, or they could be somehow if you're on that's what they are in the SkyCam system. In the Cam system, I'll show you a case history of that. You got a root that's on the ground, and, but the receiver is actually airborne. So, ground root, airborne receiver, there's both of them. Frequency domain, the problem with that, or the challenge is that the primary field is always on. And the primary field is big if you're in secondary. So you gotta do something about it, you gotta somehow remove it, we can compute it, maybe subtract it, or what's very often done is they've got a bit of a bucking coil here, which gives rise to a time varying flux that's equal and opposite to what the time varying flux would be from this primary. So that kind of nullifies that. One of the ways that they tend to kind of work with this is to keep the frames really rigid and know exactly where the transmitter and receiver are. So this is almost got 5 horizontal coplanar parts, horizontal coplane. And each of those operates at a different frequency. So here's EM31, kind of the standard for site investigation. Here, near surface site investigation. It's going to transmit to the receiver. The point is, you know where the transmitter and the receiver are, and then you can either calculate what the primary field is and subtract it. So that is question of, you know, again, basically, where to collect the how many accurate depth of investigation. These might get into all survey design questions. There's a lot of questions, but I think it's best just to take simple examples and see what happens through an example. So we're going to look at one. We've got a transmitter current that is on, and if it's a B field receiver, we have this. Say if it's a primary domain, we've got its pulse. So let's just look at this footprint in an airborne system. So what we're really interested in is what's the volume that is sensed by this. The nicest way of trying to understand that is to simply look at the currents. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have a vertical magnetic current. So we've got a horizontal loop, which gives rise to a magnetic dipole field. That's going to be perpendicular. So hence, that's where these things come. Vertical and dipole. So we're going to look first of all at a homogeneous Earth, and we're going to change it. So let's look at where the currents are. Here's our setup. So we've got a dashed line, that's the surface of the Earth. The solid line here is the plane at which the transmitter is and the receiver. So here's the transmitter, every receiver is offset a little bit. This is going to be half space at 100 meters, and we want to look at the currents. So we can visualize either on a plane or on a cross section. So those would be our two. So let's first look at a time domain system. So in which we're going to turn the current off. And then see, okay, where's the currents? Well, we've got currents in the loop, right? Like that. And we turn those off, and then we're going to get currents that are going to be used in the ground, and everything's going to follow the same symmetry. So if I look at plan view, then I get currents that are going to be circular, and right beneath the loop, okay, there's actually no currents that are produced. The major currents are going to be at some diameter, which depends upon the radius of the loop and the height that the loop is above the ground. So that's really a current right at the Earth's surface, and they're circular. If I do a cross section, because they're kind of going out of one side and in on the other, so we've got into the Earth, kind of out of the Earth, and the major concentration of the currents at this time here at 0.01 milliseconds or 100 microseconds is in place. So you can see that even, so this is 50 meters down here. So even at 50 microseconds, or 10 microseconds, we've got currents that are significantly already into. So what do I expect from magnetic fields? That distribution of currents. Where's the magnetic field going to be biased? Yeah, so the magnetic fields, the big magnetic fields are going to be here, right? So each of these, it's kind of a current filament, right? And then, so the magnetic fields are going to be high here and decrease a bit. And that's exactly right. So if I looked at the magnetic fields, then the higher sides are here, but there's still magnetic fields that are coming out from here. So here's my receiver. I can go ahead. Now what I want to do is to look to see what happens as a function of time. So we turn this system off, okay? Now it's going to happen. So initially, after we turned it off, the currents kind of look like this. If I look to see where the currents, actually this is going to be even earlier, so this is going to be at 2 microseconds. At 2 microseconds, the current density are like this. We'll just look at this left-hand side. So here's the current at 0.01 milliseconds, it's like this. Here, something like that. So you see what's happening. So you see there's these kind of dash lines there. But the current kind of as time goes down, you know, that sort of concentration current goes down. So that's what we're seeing there. For anybody who remembers the superb paper that Isak Navedian wrote back in 1979, he talked about smoke rings and time domain. And basically, like the currents kind of flow downward and upward as time progresses. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So that's an important concept. Turn the transmitter off, we get currents that are generated in the Earth, and they just go downwards. In spite of the fact that these, you know, like we see yellow here, there's a real amplitude change as a function of time. It's important. But this is 10 to the minus 7, that's 10 to the minus 8, this is 10 to the minus 9. So the currents are going downward, upward, and decay. So I guess that's an important point. Usually the currents are in the same plane, transmitter, downward, upward, and some people ask about resolution. People always ask about resolution. Ask what resolution and depth of penetration with respect to this kind of a system. Your resolution is really connected with your earliest time channel. Your earliest time channel that you're recording tells you where those currents are. They're as tight as possible. That's what you're sensitive to. So that gives you some information about that. Best resolution. And your last time challenge tells you something about how deep the currents have gone, so that's sort of your depth of penetration. Yeah, if you guys ever want to make some money, just start an extra business on Vicks cough drops. Well, at least they chuckled. The last time I said that, I know what they crazy. You know, sometimes you actually try to be funny, you know, and it's really depressing. You say something that should be absolutely hilarious, right? I don't want to do more. Okay, let's something a little bit more interesting. So let's now look at a case where we've got 3 layers. Everything's the same before, except we've got an intermediate layer that has got variable resistivity. So you can make it resistive, 1,000 millimeters. You can make it, how much? Okay. So it's kind of the same, but we've got this transmitter here, we turn it on, and now we're just going to look, okay, now we're going to put in 1 layer. Okay. So here's the homogeneous group. Looks like that. Okay. I'm going to take a layer, 20 meters depth of 40. That's here. Put a layer, and I'm going to make it resistant. Okay. What do you think is going to happen to the currents? What does it look like?
What we're going to do is slightly stretch a little bit.
Yeah, I agree though. Let it go. That's good.
Yeah, so that looks pretty good. Remember we're applying currents here. We're not applying electric fields. There's electric fields there. The currents of J equals sigma E. So there's just not so many currents in here. But you'll notice that you actually have increase. Yeah, so you're kind of right. I mean, and the reason for that is that we're just not losing information because of attenuation. So it's hitting a bit of a low attenuation region. So the way it comes down, right? And now you see this region in here, like I can go through. I'm not going to just kind of go faster and also go attenuate, and then that's right. Okay, so that's a really important part. So now you're starting to see, galvanic and doctor, wait a minute, these guys are behaving really, really differently. Here's the resistivity layer is a great friend. So I'll be looking for conductor. But it's a great friend, right? Yeah, so here where if you have this resistive, then most of the currents when they've been on here and you're galvanic, you would receive. So now what's going to happen if we make it a conductor? Okay. Yeah, so now attenuation is going to be reduced. We're not going to see below, but actually most of our currents are now in here, right? So there are still some stuff in here, but most everything, the highest currents are actually in here. So this is the guy to which you're sensitive. So even though he's deeper down, we have more sensitive. So I think this is a really interesting, this is very insightful, right? Okay, how are you seeing things? What are you, how are things affected by something like that? Oops. And then if you make it really conductive, now everything, basically everything is in this region in here, and you don't even see it. It's just, you're attenuating. So what about the magnetic fields? So now we've got this. What are the magnetic fields look like? Well, they actually change quite a bit, but they're, so in here is a homogeneous. So here you have your kind of your stretch, right? So if you look for the magnetic fields, you kind of down. Remember, we're up here. We have a conductor, and this, very conductor. Nevertheless, you're sitting up here, and you see. The point of view of someone that's flying something or trying to hit something, what is important is the sounding curve. That's basically telling you what happened, what your signal is as a function of time. So this is your signal, as a function of time for your backspace. If I put a resistor in, now I get this dashed line here. So you can see that's, I don't know, it's kind of diddly squat difference. Compared to a conductor in here, so look, see what the response is for the conductor, or the conductor is like 2 orders of magnitude. You can see how sensitive that kind of made experiment is to that conductor body and how relatively insensitive it is to a system.
Does it have anything to do with the velocity of the EM velocity?
So in here?
Yeah, when we create it slow down the EM with the propagation. We call it propagation, but it's really also compared with, I don't know how much.
Well, there will be, two things happen as the conductivity increases. First of all, the diffusion slows down, and secondly, the attenuation is more, right? Well, yeah, they're kind of hand in hand. If it hasn't gone to someplace, it's not going to attenuate. So here's our so what you're going to see here is a plan view. Here's the sounding locations and each of the dots. And across this line here, we're right over the center of the body. So this is a 1 centimeter per meter object in a minus 2 centimeters per background, 100 meter background. And we're going to look at what the response is as a function of time. So this is the earliest time, 0.025 milliseconds. And as you go along here, it's entirely brief. And all we're seeing is the half space response. Okay. A little bit later, on time view, we see this, and on profile, we see this as a bit of a bump coming out of here. But notice that the signal strength has decreased almost by an order of magnitude. Right? So the previous one was 10 by 5, now we're down to 10 by 6. We got a little bit of a bump. And then a little bit later, this is kind of the sweet spot. 0.35, 3 milliseconds. So we see a nicely delineated sphere, and here's our profile. The layer starts to diffuse out. And so kind of what you, so initially, we just don't see anything except at the top. Now, waves have diffused in, we're starting to get really good signal in here, and then eventually things dissipate out. So that's basically it. In summary, if we have a buried sphere, we're going to do a timing experiment. We've got a single sounding that looks like this, and we've got various time channels to which that sphere is most responsive. So airborne systems, the SkyGen system is an older system now. Perhaps there's a couple of points that are interesting in general here. Here's the waveform for the SkyGen. And first of all, you notice it says high moment and low moment. There's a couple of things that are important. Ultimately, in order to see deep, you need high moment. And you can get that by having multiple turns. So it's got 4 turns. And you also want to be able to shut that current off very quickly. You want to make a pulse. And it takes time to turn this guy off. And in this case here, the earliest time channel that they're able to measure is 47 microseconds. At 47 microseconds, that wave is already diffused in a certain amount. So this high moment system is really only going to be most sensitive. It's not going to be really sensitive to the very near surface. So in order to get more information about the near surface, you have a low moment system that you can shut the current off. If you have multiple turns and big currents that come through, you simply cannot turn that current on. There are all kinds of vacuum events, the electronics. So here they have a low moment system that then can be turned off faster, and it's down to 12. And then you can record, usually in log with kinds of different systems and different waveforms. So here's a V10 waveform. Like that. And here's your times which things are. And so, I mean, these are almost every system that you've got has got a certain moment. So it's area times current times something. It's got a certain waveform. It's very important. It's extremely crucial to know exactly what this waveform is. Very difficult sometimes to get from better. To know when people talk about time 0, is it here at the end of the ramp, is it in the middle of the ramp, is it at the top of the ramp? Those kinds of details turn out to be extremely important when you measure them further and try to work with it. But I mean, this is at some level what everybody is doing. I've got a waveform, I'm turning it off, or I'm repeating it somehow. And the characteristics of that waveform are different, and my track channels are a bit different, but really it's all the same. So for case history, we're going to do one that I think is really interesting from a number of perspectives. First of all, it shows the time domain, right? It's not a mineral deposit, but even people with minerals are interested in groundwater and this is just general. So this is area in Denmark. That's called the Kapsted area, and it's got region like that. So it's sort of 10 kilometers plots. And what they're interested in is finding these sort of paleo channels and the depths to sort of a Miocene clay that was sitting on here, Paleogene clay, and try to find out where that is, because these kind of tooth-like things that are coming in here are the things that really contain the water. And there's a few sands and sills and clays here, but the bottom is really just trying to find that Paleogene clay, find out where this comes from. The other thing is that sets this up is that from a global perspective, what they're interested in is not only this image here, but they'd actually like to be able to make a 3D hydrogeologic model so that they got the hydraulic conductivity of this, so that they can do the following experiments, because they really want to know if they pump water out here, okay, where does water come from? Right underneath, circular region, channel from someplace, you just pump it out where they come from. And the other is that if I have a couple of wells, if I draw out of one, is that affecting this guy, or can I draw both of them? It's sort of like connected. So there's lots of really interesting and important questions that one would like to address here. And here's where geophysics can be. So what are our properties again? Well, first of all, these Paleogene clays, these blue things with purple underneath here, that have a very low resistivity, 1 to 10 millimeters. And the sands and the gravels in here are probably greater than 60 millimeters, so there's a real big conductivity contrast. And then other things are kind of in between. Okay, the phone was a Skycam survey, and so here's the transmitter, and then the receiver is sitting up here, so it's kind of not coupled with the transmitter. Got a high moment, low moment system, sort of 300 meter squared area, and these are the contracts, so it's just flat as sky. Here's the area again. The blue lines are the survey lines. Sort of 300 on 1 kilometers of data, 100 meter spacing. There was a lot of cultural noise, so you need to kind of work with this stuff and got under a few points. But then they took the rest of it and they inverted it. They used basically a 1D inversion, but that was kind of laterally constrained. So sometimes they call it quasi 3D. Like 500 soundings, and then they looked at the result of resistivity map. So this is at a slice sort of 5 meters above sea level. This resistivity, so this purple, red purple is resistive. The opposite color stand what we're not in. So these are big resistors that are coming through here. And then the other thing you're interested in is what the depth are of these paleo channels. So you can get the depth to them, or this is a mean altitude of sea level. The blue here are really sort of strong negative values. So the blue, that means it's really deep. So here's your channels that are kind of coming through here. So that tells you where they are and yeah. So from that information, they delineated these 20 valleys that were connected. And then they used also the DC, or the electrical conductivity model. And they had ground, had a number of drill holes that they had, and they were able to kind of start to do cross correlations and use the EM as conductivity as sort of a proxy for particular lithologic units, and then from there they went to a hydraulic conductivity. So that was the system. So they used the EM inversion to eventually get a structural and hydrogeologic model. And with that, then they're able to accomplish their goals, because now we've got a hydrogeologic model, you connect that up to something like mod flow, and now you can start to see if I draw something from here and something from here, where's the water coming from? So from here, this is the water is coming from up to here, and here it's coming in. Here you see these guys are almost kind of getting connected. So that's the kind of information that's really useful to, so that the connectivity map is particularly, as soon as you start to transfer it into structural information as far as depth of data channels, or better yet, use it as part of a process to get a hydrogeologic model. Okay, so that's a case for water. Now let's do the minerals. So this is getting a little bit different. I think you might be interested. This is some work that registered and keep putting in. So this is labor. How many people have been associated with labor? So it's a composite kind of in Manitoba here, and it's a zinc-rich massive sulfide. So here's a typical kind of cross section, alteration types, and sulfides on the outside, and you got some gold copper regions in here, and you got a zinc-rich region. So it is actually a whole bunch of kind of thin sheeted mineralization with zinc, gold, and copper gold. They're thin. They're from a physical property viewpoint, they're good conductors. So the background is volcanics are resistant, and the sulfides are conductive. And this is a depth. So this is 750 meters. This is 1,000. This is 1,250. So you're looking pretty deep. At the time that this was done, then the upper reaches were known, but trying to find some information about what's going on at depth, these other regions was definitely a challenge. Lidar has been a test site. They've had symposiums on there, in fact, a number of them. And I think there's like 13 different EM surveys that have been run on that. So it's become kind of a test site, and that makes it kind of easy, makes it interesting to look at and to work with because of that. We got intrigued with it because of something called HeliSAM. So it's put out by Gap Geophysics, and it's very unusual. So they lay out, well, this loop was laid out. That loop has been used for many, many different kinds of surveys. It's a couple of kilometers on the side. And there's a waveform, sort of about 7.5 hertz, so it's very low. And to sort of a ramp turn on. Now, the interesting thing here is that the receiver is a total field magnetometer. So it's a seizing vapor magnetometer, and it's recording 16 time channels. And the data are acquired along these flood lines. Okay, so that's a bit unusual, right? Because usually you measure like a dB, Z, dT or something. If you're measuring total magnetic field, okay, so we can work with that. Let's figure out what we're measuring first. Well, we're sitting up here measuring the B field. So where's the B field coming from? Well, it's coming from the Earth. Okay, so there's B naught. And then, so that's sort of the sort of main bulk field. And then, there could be anomalous bodies in the Earth. And then there could also be induced EM that's coming out because of the time that we got. So that's your total magnetic field that you're observing. But now we got to process that. So just the same as in mag, what you do is you take that maximum value and you subtract off the Earth's field. Okay? And that leaves you basically, since the Earth's field is so large and everything else is a projection, basically the projection of the anomalous plus the EM field onto the Earth's field. Okay, now we want to change. What we're really interested in is just try to extract the EM component. We've got this business of transmitting the waveform in opposite polarities. So we subtract and we can end up with a number that is basically the projection of the EM response onto the Earth's field. Okay, so now, so the idea is that we've got a loop up around, put in a constant current, turn it off, and now we've got all kinds of induction that's going in, and then we can measure that induction, but we're only going to measure one component instead of Z component or something. We're just going to measure the component in the direction of the Earth's field. Okay, so one component of data, but that's have to get something up. So here's what the data are going to look like at early times. We see something that looks like this. So it's with high values here, in fact there's a change in zone, and then kind of falls off. At later times, it looks like this. So it's sort of much larger, and then so you can see, there's probably a really big conductor down there just from the data. But things are kind of cracked up here at the early times. So what's usually done? The fact that this stuff here is, it's like just cultural noise, and it's usually just thrown away. This is what's done 99% of the time. People are like, oh, I don't want to do that. Let's just get rid of it. Okay? So let's get rid of it. So let's just look at the late time channels, 4 to 28 milliseconds, and then go ahead and try to invert it. There's a little sub-story that's going on here. In general, when we start our 3D inversion, it's like, oh, put it in half space. But in this particular case, just because we had this kind of thin sheet conductor, just the way it was, we didn't go anywhere. The inverted algorithm did not go anywhere. And that was a bit surprising to us. And now we realize, like, oh, well, if we just have a current that's going like this, right, and then we started off from scratch and homogeneous half space, and we've kind of got galvanic currents that are driving things, so there's no induction to kind of get started. So there's nothing there for the original algorithm to grab hold of it to do it. So we overcame that by saying, okay, well, let's warm start it. So we just got Maxwell, and Maxwell was put in a couple of plates. Just basically took something, do some connectivity in, and now we've got something so that you have induction that's going on. And that was enough for the algorithm to so it needed one start, and in the end, we ended up with a pretty nice conductor. So we were actually pretty pleased with that. Okay, so we got all the way from taking this kind of unusual data, inverting it in 3D, and coming up with a conductor that's a much longer time. However, when we look at the surface, you can see that there's stuff going on at the surface, and there wasn't any reasonably geologically that was there. So that seemed to be, kind of artifacts that were there. And maybe that was because we'd thrown away that early time information, which has information from the surface. So what's the effect of throwing away that early time data? Well, just invert the early time data. So now, if we're going to invert the early time data, we probably need a whole bunch of smaller cells, because things are really varying a spatial manner. So here was the inversion of the early time data from channels 1 to 7, and it kind of gives us this. Well, that's the power line. There's a power line, and then there's maybe a couple of hours of these things, right? So the good news is, high intensity geophysical inversion, intense concentration to people are going to find power lines. Good job. Okay. But this isn't really a power line at a centimeter level. These are power line. This is the representation of the power line in blocks that are 25 meters. But that's okay. That's all we need. We just need to have something that emulates that response. So now we've got this model here. So it's kind of like a fine scale model. And now we're going to use that information and we're going to put it into an inversion in which we use everything. So we're going to make a starting and reference model that uses those two initial warp start blocks. And we're going to use the early time infrastructure. Now we put that in for everything, and we get out something like this. So notice the near surface structure has now gone away. That's good. It's really effective. We've got the deep conductor. That's really nice. And the interesting thing about it is we got this guy. So there's a vertical conductor. And that's offset in the main packet. And they built that. And it was found to be a result. So here's the image of their sheet orbit. Here's the thing that we found, and here's the rest of the image. So the takeaways here, and I think this applies to not this example, but others. Where the people acquire data, the data look a little problematic, and they say, well, let's get rid of that, and do something. First of all, those early time data constrain that near surface structure, and they improve the inversion then for the late times because we just didn't have those additional artifacts, and the warp start was. What time was lecture? Okay, we're good. Wow. And I said, is there a question?
I have a question on the last slide. Maybe the way of looking at it. The power line is more or less coincident with your on the surface roof.
Yeah.
Something more function of access.
Yeah, it might be, but it's not a good idea.
Oh, that loop has been there for years. Because this is so similar to what we've already done, so we're still in data sources, and so it's a question of, okay, what's the difference between time domain and frequency domain? So here's time domain, there's a receiver with that frequency domain. Physics is completely the same. And if we look at this vertical magnetic dipole over a half space, we're going to see exactly the same kinds of things that we have. So if we look at a frequency, so this is 10 kilohertz, then now in the frequency domain, the current is still moving around. And here's our currents with a vertical magnetic dipole. And Here's my magnetic field there, as I would expect. So given the magnetic field is going, the magnetic field maximum is going to be in the middle here between these. And if I up the frequency, then things get more complicated. You can see how complicated the magnetic field lines can actually be. But fortunately, we're up here, and this is actually a pretty high frequency. But the, yeah, so the effects of frequency, again, is that at lower, at high frequency, we see close to the surface, at low frequency, we see down. And if we come down to our Earth model that looks like this, and it's got a layer in here, so now we've got a layer that we can make resistive and conductive, so it's that, we're just repeating what we did in the time. So here's a half space. If we have 1,000 ohm meter, again, there's really no attenuation in here, and you just basically see what's happening here and a little bit at depth. If it's conductive, then you start to see that conductive layer, and there's a lot of currents in here, and if you go to a really conductive layer, then you're just into that. The images, so this is kind of interesting too. When we first started off, we were going to present the understanding of everything, first in terms of frequency and then time. You know that it just gets harder because even in these plots you can see that we're kind of, it makes the point, but it doesn't make the point quite as easily as we did in the time domain. And the reason for that is that there's always this partitioning. You have currents that go from, so parts in the real, parts in the imaginary, and then as you're going down, in depth, there's different parts that are kind of coming into place. So it's harder to get a really, really nice class, but if you work in the time domain, establish the physical understanding, and then go to frequency, then I can show you these plots, and it's like, okay, yeah, that's the same as I already seen. And the same is true with any propagation of fields. If you look at it in the frequency domain, because you have that primary, it's just tougher to really understand. But if you work in the time domain, establish what's going on, then go to frequency. And so here's what happens for the magnetic fields. Again, you can see how complicated they are, but we're sitting up here. And here's our sounding curves. So it's the same situation, but now we've got a real and imaginary. So instead of one line, we've got two responses. And if we have a resistor, there is a difference, but not huge. And if we have a conductor, there's a huge difference between the bottom, which has the layers based in it, and the solid, which is the passive. And we make it really consistent. Really good. I think this is a good place to end this, because now we can kind of come back to the shielding problem. Okay? So this was the guy who hooked us when we did the DC resistor. Right? So we put in that resistor, currents get confined above, and we just come up. However, now, what's going to happen? I use an inductive source system, and so now let's put that thin resistor in here. So that is here. If I have my half space and my sphere, so you can see there's currents that are building up here, but I'm also seeing this guy. Okay. If I put that resistive layer in, this is it. Just completely transparent. So that's great. So we're just not hurting ourselves at all with that resistive. However, and then also if I look at my curves, my sounding curves, However, now, if I take the same thing and I put it in my conductive layer, what's going to happen? Still screwed. You're screwed, right? Yeah. So, in my when I did the DC resistivity, everything gets channeled through. I completely and now, if I go ahead and I do this, if I put in a conductive layer in here, I no longer see it. So this is what I would see. It's not there on the screen, but you can still see the sphere here. If I put that conductive layer in, I get the conductivity that's induced in here. So that's basically it. That's why we want to do. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have a launch, and I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to actually pick it up by showing you one app. Because these things are so informative. You know, if we had a couple of days, we could show you some more and take you through how they work and stuff like that. But we'll have time to do one. And then I'm going to pick it up with groundwater example. And now we're going to go over to the interesting problem of grounded sources. Okay, perfect.